it would hammer in the idea that like no, like this is why we need to keep the New Republic together. This is the agency that Leia has to embody. This is why Mon Mothma has to do what she does, and this is why it's really bad for characters like. Yeah, I know.
We'll get
Bad
to
for
Mon
Forgot
characters
Mothma.
like
about that. Oh my
We'll
god.
get
bad
to
for
Yeah.
Mon
characters,
Okay. Go
Mothma.
bad for
ahead.
characters
Sorry.
like
Sorry.
Act.
Go ahead.
No,
Go
it's
ahead.
okay. It's
Yes.
okay. I'm
Yeah.
with you. I'm with you.
Yeah.
And this is also
If I take him at his most charitable, I would just say, yeah, he's just not into that. If I was predisposed to assuming the worst of him, I would say he either has contempt for the character or the reader. Which I don't want to say that about him, but there were times where it was just like, this is so. What are you doing?
It was all. I have this problem. I need to solve it. Moving on to the next page, we've solved it. It was like you said before, Matt. It's very kind of comic book in how it's approaching the pacing and the speed of the story. It's kind of it's clear that he has experience from that medium that he's bringing here. I think, and there's maybe a
Yeah.
disconnect between his skill sets there.
Yeah.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and welcome back to Fanalysis Star Wars. I'm Callan. This is Matt,
Hello.
and
Welcome.
this is Evan.
Greetings.
Talking about Jedi Academy trilogy today. We were going to be doing this as one complete trilogy in one video because we didn't think we were going to have as much to say about it as we are probably going to end up having to talk. So instead, we're going to be doing this book by book, as is our usual way of doing things. Starting with Jedi Search. We have a range of opinions on these books. Who wants to start us off on this one?
I'm probably the wrong person, but I'll just give whatever usual spiel I normally do. This is Jedi Search, so we're going to be talking about that shortly. But I think broadly we'll be talking about our loose opinions on the series overall. So this is written by Kevin J. Anderson, which is a name that I recognize mostly from. I think he had something to do with the Tales of the. No, not. Yeah, Tales of the Jedi. That's like the old Sith Wars trilogy, or
Yes,
not trilogy, comic series.
Yeah.
I think he had something to do with that, like Tom Veitch or Veitch, however you say his name, is like the more credited author on there. But I think Kevin J. Anderson either helped as like a story editor, or certainly his name is just on some of like the follow-up issues, like the Redemption arc with like that came a few years later with different artwork and everything that covered Ulick Keldrummer later years. So his name is on things that I do like. I don't know what happened here. I'm happy to discuss. I'm happy to talk about all of that. My thoughts on this are not particularly positive, and we'll get into that. Having said that, I did not absolutely hate this trilogy. I do, like Callan said, I find it interesting to think about and to talk about. For me, mostly as an exercise in what makes good writing and why I don't necessarily think that that's what happened here. But that's for me. That's my opening statement here.
Yeah, Evan, you give
Fair
the
enough.
opposing argument
Okay.
there because you had a very different
Yeah, I'm
interpretation
coming
of
at
this.
it from a slightly different angle. I do want to open up by saying too that like I do think this trilogy is flawed in various points to say the least. I'm not quite as necessarily as critical. I think they're fun. I do like a lot of the characters introduced in this series that go on to do a lot of interesting things later on in stories like the Vong War. Luke's students obviously being core narratives of that. Speaking of Tales of the Jedi, I do like the follow up that also this trilogy covers. Specifically, obviously with things like Exar Kun and just the Sith War and all of that continuity. At the same time, I think what also really just kind of sticks with me about this trilogy is it very much kind of reminds me of like the old sci-fi serials I used to read and watch growing up. With all the positives and negatives that description entails, I just want to say, which obviously those were things that also Star Wars, like took inspiration, from the get go, Flash Gordon and all that. So
Mhm.
it's cheesy, it's weird. A lot of things don't make sense at certain points, but I enjoy them in the same way that I enjoy certain sequences in Return of the Jedi, like the Jabba's palace stuff. Narratively, they have no major bearing on the broader story of the universe, but at the same time, it's just fun. And there are things in this trilogy that I just think are fun, and nothing about it really offends my sensibilities. I think the writing is competent at best and admittedly pretty weak in other points, but again, I never wanted to like tear my hair out. I was never necessarily even in some of the cutaways which had no major point. I can't say I was ever completely bored. So there's that. I just so yeah, I'm just gonna say does a lot right, does a lot wrong. Nothing really offended me. Fun stuff here and there, boring stuff here and there. At the end of the day, net positive, C minus.
Fair
Fair enough.
enough. Well, that's a lower grade than what I thought you were going to say based on the description, I have to say. But
C
Callum.
I was
minus,
expecting
C
more of a
plus,
B. Yeah.
C range. The whole thing is a C. It's a passing grade.
Yeah. Fair enough.
It's
Fair enough.
yeah.
I'm kind of, I mean, in true Sentinel fashion, somewhere in the middle between you two, I think. I mean, I completely agree with all of the positives and negatives that either side are kind of bringing up here. I mean, you talk about the writing quality and the kind of craft of the story and the book, Matt, and I completely agree with all points. I don't have much positive to say in that regard across the whole trilogy. Obviously, there are bright flashes and individual scenes where there are exceptions to this, but by and large, this was one of the weaker of the books that we've talked about recently, particularly for its era and what comes shortly afterwards as well. But leaning into the kind of positives that Evan's talking about, when it comes to the content and the kind of the story choices being made, even though they are also often bad and even when they're not, very weird, I see the heart in them. You know, this isn't a case of something like the stuff we felt with Dark Empire, where the premise is dead on arrival for us personally, or in other stories where, you know, I mean, like the sequel trilogy, for example, where they're just doing things that they just don't care about the world. They're not adding to things. They're not bringing like their own ideas to it. They clearly are trying to do something here, and I'm broadly speaking on board with the overall aims. It's just mesh the weirdness of that comes with that positive side together with what I think is pretty weak storycraft in terms of the writing quality, the prose, particularly the character voices for me, etc. And you get muddled together in this kind of middle point of just, I see what they were going for here, and I like what they were going for in most cases, but how they accomplished it, or more broadly failed to, in my mind, just kind of let me down. Was a bit of a disappointment. So yeah, I'm kind of like half and half. But there are exceptions, ebbs and flows all throughout the trilogy, and we will talk about those as we go through each book, because I enjoyed myself. I want to make that clear. I agree with all the technical flaws, but they weren't dragging down my personal enjoyment of the story, even if I was like, wouldn't have done that, or why have you done this, and all that jazz.
Okay, I have a few things to say. So because you mentioned the sequel trilogy, the dreaded sequel trilogy, for a variety of reasons, I found myself thinking of those while reading these, and not necessarily in a way that made these books look better. I was more troubled by how similar they are in some ways.
I did wonder, did they draw on this particular trilogy? Like, did someone go,
like
what inspiration can we draw from when they just picked up this trilogy? A lot of that tracks into some of the sequel decision making. I mean, that's not the book's fault, obviously. They don't go anywhere near the bad quality of the sequels overall, but there are some core concepts that bleed across quite
Can you
clearly.
maybe expand on that a little bit, Matt? I'm just curious.
Of course I can. Of course I can. Yeah, like, so,
and will, sir. May the prosecution stand.
Okay, I wanted to say that as well. I am coming into these, lest anyone have the wrong thought, right? I remember, my favorite trilogy growing up in the Star Wars universe was the Darth Bane trilogy, not the Timothy Zahn Thrawn stuff. That was the hallowed ground of the fan base, right? And it is good, okay? But I didn't read it until like later, because I was just born when the first Thrawn book came out. So I was, well into my teenage years when I finally picked that up, and I had already read a number of books in Star Wars that I thought were as good, or frankly, better in some cases, or games, in the case of KOTOR, So Thrawn trilogy was not, like the holy grail for me, even though it is good, and I don't deny that. My favorite trilogy growing up was the Darth Bane trilogy, and when we looked at that again, and I had adult eyes in my head, we roasted those books. So this is not about coming into this and being like, this is terrible and I hate this and I'm biased against it. No, not at all. I am coming in with a prosecution mindset. I am trying to send these to jail. I'm trying to get them convicted, but I am doing so in accordance with the law. Okay, like, it's not because I have a bias against these. This is about writing, okay? And I would argue that you guys are too soft on this. Sorry, I have to say that. I have to say that.
Okay.
But to explain the sequel trilogy thing, it has a number of the same plot points, a number of them, and I don't like them any better here. I mean, you want to talk about super destructive weapons, like just out
Take
the
your
yin
pick.
yang. I mean,
take your pick.
That's lame.
And also, we'll talk much more about this and much more in depth later, especially in the second book. But just very broadly speaking, I think for the two of you, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so defend this if I've got this wrong, but one of the hallmarks, well, maybe it's the wrong word. One of the absolute low points of the sequel trilogy was the depiction not just of Luke's character, but the fact that he hadn't really got like a functioning Jedi Order up and running, right?
Mm,
You know,
absolutely,
before
yeah. Just
everything went
the
south.
full
You,
character
you didn't
That's
get
assassination
to
that's
of
see
him.
certainly
it.
a
Yeah.
big part of it. Yes.
Yeah. Uh, this this is much better in terms of like the stated intent, but in terms of like what he actually achieves here, I don't see it as being that much better. And so I think it really is like a question of, okay, I like the ideas, like you guys have said, you like the
Mm,
ideas here, and the ideas I think are fine to hold up. It's this weird case where the idea is superior. The actual like execution of it, I don't see as that much different than whatever happened between like him trying to kill his nephew in the past, like in the sequel trilogy, and like the actual events of the Force Awakens. Like things go pretty off rails, you know. And so what it is when you go into the sequels, you've had enough years to just have the expanded universe where they got the books got better than this, and things like the NJO series.
mm,
If it was just this and only this, and this was where they left it, if nothing else had been published after this point, I don't see this as like on a higher level than the sequel trilogy.
Mm.
Again, it's not to say that it's as offensive as that, as for many other reasons, but
mm.
just beat for beat, bar for bar. No, I
Yeah.
mean,
It,
I
I
think
on that
Luke's an
point,
incompetent teacher in this,
yeah,
and I'm
Yeah.
just
exactly.
disappointed by
On
that.
that point,
Yeah.
in terms of the quality, completely agree. In terms of the extremis of how far it falls in character level, I think that the sequel trilogy is far inferior. Like I said, the stated goal of what they're reaching for here in the story and the idea behind it is much stronger in the fact that he's trying to forge a new order. He's trying to establish the first generation of the next Jedi Knights. He's trying to teach in terms of how he does that and and more importantly, his involvement in that process, because he's basically not there. I mean, he's a very
Mhm.
passive agent in this story. I mean, kind of collects them all and then just sort of, okay, you do your own thing, like levitate some rocks or something like that. We'll talk about the details of how this goes across. Completely agree. It's not executed. It's a hair's breadth better execution in the sequels on that level for me. But the goal of what the point of the story is, the idea behind it, the direction of the world building, the direction of the setting, etc. The arc of the saga, in that he is now trying to raise next Jedi Knights. He's trying to bring the Jedi back. You know, fulfilling the promise of Return of the Jedi, etc. They're worlds apart from me there,
No,
which is
yeah,
why
no,
I'm more
yeah,
forgiving of the
but
failings in the actual
nominally,
craft itself.
pretend that the Last Jedi has never come out yet. You
Hmm.
can't say that that didn't happen. You know what I mean? Like just in terms of the words, the actual substance of like the idea that yeah, Luke tried to restart the Jedi. If you're
Hmm.
just looking at the Force Awakens, right? If you just left with that, yeah, he did. He did try, and he himself fucked it when he tried to kill his nephew or whatever, as you find out in the later movie.
Hmm.
But he did like it's lip service to me. It's like this.
The key
Did you
difference
get any
is the
good
story
Jedi
is
out of
taking
this? Did you
place.
get good Jedi like out of this? Did you get
No,
Jedi
no, for sure.
experience?
The trilogy
Yeah.
as a whole fails on that same level, but the difference being is it's focusing on the telling of that story. The story is failing for all the reasons that the sequel stories fail, but they're actually trying to show it on page. You know, this is them trying to build the order. It's the start of the order growing up into being what will then become the later order that comes later. The sequel trilogy just skips it all. Oh, and he tried,
Yeah,
failed, moving on,
I'm not
and
arguing
beside
that.
that point.
That's
That's
part of my
why the
case.
key like extremis of offense is different for me there.
Mhm.
I don't know. To
I
me, it like you're really. I think that you're buying and you're relying on the credit that the rest of the EU you called it the arc of the series. What if this had been the last of the series? You
Oh, it would
never
have
got
been a
more
complete
books
flop
after
and
this.
failure, yeah.
It would
But
have
it's
been,
still, but
yeah,
the
it would have
intent's
been.
still
Thank
Thank
there.
you.
you.
Yeah.
But the intent's still
No,
there. It wasn't there at all for the sequels.
I don't know.
I
I mean, I don't know about that. It's because it's disjointed. I'm not here to defend the sequels in that way, but I would not give this guy credit for his foresight and everything. I think he just did. I think he told things in as haphazard a way because these are messy as hell, and so are the
yeah.
sequels. That's part of the problem.
Completely agree.
Anyway,
In the construction of the craft of the story being told, but they are trying to tell the story of the order being returned. Whereas the sequel just went, the order came back and that failed and it died, moving on to the next thing. Like, you just completely skipped over the whole
Mhm.
point of Return of the Jedi. This isn't doing it. It's tackling it,
Right.
I would
failing
because
miserably
The
in
fulfillment
ways
of
that are
I want to
similar
let I
to
want
how
to
the sequels were
yeah, I
handled.
think is what he's trying to say.
Yeah.
I want to let Evan go. I want to let Evan go. That is mainly because of the character's ages. That's
Mhm.
what that's.
Yeah,
You
no,
have to
I
skip to
know.
the
But
end.
ultimately,
Okay,
that's still how it happened, though, isn't it? I
Mhm.
completely agree.
doesn't matter. Like
Yeah.
I mean, I just I want to be really clear that I think of the three of us, like I think it could come across like I have like a hate boner for these. I don't. I think that I absolutely think you do have that for the sequels, and
Hmm.
to me, this isn't that much better. Is what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
I agree in craft and not in intention, personally. But Evan, you go. What do you want to say?
No, and I'm again, I'm taking elements from both of you here. I do want to acknowledge just right out of the gate too that I am coming back looking at this with some hindsight bias, kind of like what you were alluding to earlier, Matt, because like a lot of the characters introduced in this trilogy are characters I go on to find, incredibly compelling in things like NJO. Even in things like I Jedi, which is like a direct follow-up to this trilogy, is I'm just gonna say it point blank, one of my favorite Star Wars books, period. Because again, it basically I Jedi basically is like, okay, let's try this trilogy again, but let's do it better, in every conceivable way. So I do want to acknowledge that fact just from the get-go that yes, if you are just looking at this purely as a vacuum with nothing else going for it, yeah, those flaws are definitely there. What I will say though is I do think even in this self-contained just looking at the new characters, I just want to be very clear on that. Like characters like Gantoris, characters like Kip, characters like Silgal, characters like Streen. I do think that those characters in particular in the sort of setup that they have for their individual personalities, not so much in the writing, but I do like the characterization and the way that they go out of their way to have their individual personalities impact their relationship to the Force. I'm not saying that justifies Luke's absentee training methods because I
Oh
agree. I
no,
don't like that. I
hell
don't like
no.
that whatsoever. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I do like the fact that a focus is put on Luke's interpretation of the Jedi Order in his new style, and I do like the fact that the it's hard to explain. Is it possible? I'm almost saying like character voice is like simultaneously weak and strong for some of these characters because on the one hand they do go out of their way to establish individual histories and motives and how that impacts their relationship to the Force for the new characters.
Hmm.
For the old characters, they just feel like cardboard cutouts from what we've seen in the films, and that makes a lot of the mesh really, really awkward at times. So, yeah, I think that's a big part of why certain chapters and certain storylines it feels like there's a disconnect because and I'm not saying, Kevin J. Anderson, just wanted to focus on these new characters and, left the old ones to the wayside or anything like that. But I will say there does seem to be a level of I don't even want to say interest, but also just in the sort of writing style that he puts in for these characters when we go into the POV. At least for me, there seemed to be a lot more depth when he's basically covering characters that were introduced in this trilogy versus the ones we've known up until that point. And I think that really contributes to the sort of awkwardness of a lot of the transitions. If am I making sense here?
Yeah, no,
Yes.
I can get that because I
I
definitely
don't know.
found even though the writing quality is as the level doesn't particularly spike for the new characters. It's still the same level of written quality in terms of how their arcs are handled, how they're presented, etc. But unlike the previous known characters to us that we've seen in the original trilogy films and also in the previous works like the Thrawn trilogy, etc., we don't have the kind of disconnect between
The
what we
baggage, the
know.
history,
Yeah,
which is also
but
something the sequels trilogy failed at, like you were saying, Matt. Like they basically just took these characters and just completely, didn't do them justice on the big screen
yeah,
because of
Right.
the
the
the,
Yeah.
the
choppy
Okay.
actual
So
storytelling.
the,
So
the
that's
it's the disparity in the voices of those characters put onto this page.
yeah.
There's additional layer of friction for you as a reader instead of
it's
just
not just
having
that.
it's not just that, but instead of just having average writing, you're having average writing that is rubbing up against the expectation of the voices of the characters as well. You take that part out for new characters so it doesn't hurt them as much. But I think the quality itself, in terms of how they're being
I
portrayed and how they're tied to their arc, etc., is just as weak.
I think that
Mhm.
that's a valid comment. I don't agree with it. I think that if that's your take on it, I'm not going to try to dissuade you from it. I think that that's fair enough and is consistent. I think that I don't think that this guy really. You used a phrase a couple of minutes ago, Evan, about like you weren't sure, you weren't saying what Kevin J. Anderson wanted to do. Like when you said that with a specific point, and I can't remember precisely how you used it. I would have you just stopped the sentence there. I don't know what he was trying to do. I don't feel like this is constructed with enough vision at all, like to understand what he was up to. I honestly, I am more offended at the lack of character for the mains than you guys are, I think. And I don't know exactly why that is. You guys
No,
can
no,
speak for
I'm
yourselves on
offended.
that.
I'm offended and bothered by it. I'm just saying that it's the. Do you mean so the new characters or the original mains?
I
The
said
original.
the originals.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Like
the
I'm
original.
bothered
Yeah.
by them more. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that we get the bad writing plus the friction of them not honoring the voice of the previous works.
That's what
Whereas
I mean. Like,
with
too,
the
that
new,
disconnect really makes the lack of character for the OG cast become all the stronger because
yeah,
to me, there is that disconnect there, and that's why that's another thing too, Matt. Like it does feel like that sort of sequel trilogy disconnect, but for obviously very different circumstances than
Yeah.
was in
Right.
those
I mean,
movies.
this I don't. I honestly felt like while I was reading this, um, I wasn't convinced that this guy had actually like seen the movies, or like he could have gotten away with just reading scripts of what happened in the films and not actually like feeling any of it and just saying, "Oh yeah, this is when Luke did this and this is when Han did that." Constant callbacks to the events of
Mm.
on screen to the point of
Line
like,
by
why are you even
line.
doing it
Yeah.
at this point?
It gets a little
Constant,
tiresome. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
and I I hate Luke in these. I'm sorry. Like
Yeah,
I
I
don't think
really
you
do as
guys do
well.
from the way you're
I do.
talking.
No,
Oh,
I
you
do.
do?
I do.
Okay, then
I
why
mean,
are you
This
guys?
this is what I'm
I don't
saying.
I
I'm
don't
not I'm
hate
not
maybe
saying that the original characters have been doing I'm saying the original characters are written poorly and have the additional layer of friction in that they don't match their previous counterparts, so it makes them worse. I'm saying that the new characters are written just as poorly, but because you don't have that additional layer of friction, it seems more tolerable and it seems like
No, no, that's
it's better
fine.
honed. That's what I was
I think
saying.
that that's consistent. But why am I out on the island as the most negative here? Like, if you don't like Luke as much as I don't, like, what are you taking from these? What's the joy?
As I
You
said,
mentioned the
I
heart. I would like for you to
yeah,
explain what's the heart here. I'm open minded about
yeah,
this.
for
Convince
sure.
me,
no, no,
or
I think
just make your case
You
anyway.
go
Yeah.
first, Evan.
yeah, I think the heart comes into the what I did get from characters like Luke and Han is that for me, like why it doesn't offend me as much as something like the sequel trilogy is like that. Kind of speaking to what Callan was saying earlier about the intention of like fostering this new generation of not just Jedi, but also just in the New Republic. Like that sort of there's a theme throughout this whole trilogy about basically taking up the mantle, the torch of past generations. And although it's kind of hard to explain, basically like with characters like Luke, Han, and Leia, you even though they feel like shadows of what they were in the films, you can still sort of see how those characters go from what we've seen to having these sort of thought processes and this sort of missions and these sort of desires to sort of further this growth in the galaxy. So I think that's what that element to me is consistent, even though they're not really written with nearly as much character as they previously had or would go on to have. Which is why I think for me it's like, okay, I wouldn't have written it this way, but I can see Luke doing this. I wouldn't have written it this way, but I could see Leia doing this. I wouldn't have written it this way, but yeah, Han would do that if he was in this situation. So I think that's why it doesn't take me out of it completely.
Can
And for
I say
me,
on the back of that? Sorry.
sorry, no,
Go
you
ahead.
go.
Go ahead, Callan.
I
Yeah.
was just
You
saying,
sure?
and for me, it's just the intent and the idea and the goals behind it. I agree with you that they're failing on every single front. The writing quality, the quality of the voice, the decision making, the pacing, the plot choices, the timings, everything about it. I'm completely with you. It's all falling apart in ways that can similarly be levied against the in style to the sequels. But the
Yeah.
story they're deciding to tell as incompetently as the sequels, for the most part, is not the same one the sequels told. They're trying to go, okay, what comes next? How do I add to
Yeah.
this world? What's the progression of
Yeah,
the
I'm
story for
gonna
these characters and for the
here.
world?
yeah. It's
Can
like
I
That's
it's like
like
just?
it's like to
worlds
me.
apart from what they did with the
Yeah,
sequels. That's
I'm
where I
gonna
was
say
yeah.
flagging that.
I would like to say something like with regard to the sequels. I am not excusing them for failing to do because of the fact that there's such a thing as flashbacks. You can insert that story even though the actors by that point were
Mm,
getting on in years. I get that. You can absolutely still tell a story of the kind that you wanted to see at the very least in the background, like leading up to the events of current day.
mm,
I'm not excusing that at all. As far as this guy and his talents are concerned, I'm putting it mostly down to luck on his end because the characters are properly aged for that, and there was no other, nothing else on the horizon when he was working with this. Which normally I'm willing to be quite generous for that reason because an author is sort of creating as they're going, and they're kind of like taking a step into a larger world, right?
mm.
I get that. With this opportunity, with this series, with this brand, some of the ideas here, I just think are like bottom tier. Like, I just don't understand how I
I
don't
agree.
understand settling on this when you haven't like already exhausted every conceivable notion. Some of these are just this guy, his name was on things like the Dune series, after the original author had passed away. He's a number of known IPs. I think he was kind of like an author for hire of
Mm,
that kind, basically a professional fan fiction writer. And I don't mean to demean him too much with that, but that I don't know much of like what his original work has like got, graced its way like across a publisher's desk, and how much of him is just expanding existing IPs for profit. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not like, even like in an ethical sense, I'm not necessarily opposed to that. You get your start somewhere, or there is just a market for like expanding a universe. I get that. But this, I don't know. I feel like I have higher standards for what I want. I had only read the second book of this years ago when I was young, and I had been told, and that was by accident. If we want to just zoom out and talk about like the actual events of the series and how we came to it and everything else, and start getting into the events of Jedi Search proper, I I think I want to say I found it either at a used bookstore for like nothing, or at like a garage sale, or maybe even at like a end of the year at school. They were trying to get rid of some books out of the library and giving stuff away. So I didn't buy it. I didn't know what it was. It wound up in my house and I had it, right? And it was like a battered old copy. So this is Dark Empire, right? That's the only, or Apprentice, excuse me. This is the only one of the books that I had read up to this point, and I had later been told by a friend that who mentioned this to me, and I said, "Well, I've only read the second one." He goes, "Oh, that's okay. You can skip the first one." I find that to be largely true. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, like it's a
100%.
very it's to me. I said this before we started recording. I was trying to think of like what I would actually say was done well. There are certainly things that I think are done better than others. It
Mm.
didn't do anything that I needed it to do. And if the main thrust behind it is that it gets the idea of a Jedi Academy, a renewed Jedi Order, like off the ground, I'm happy to give it that. I also think that's the most obvious and natural decision, that he
Yeah.
had been left with. That's teed up by everything that came before to do all of his original notions. I have a lot of notes, a lot of them, and I think the character that I hate the most in these might be Leia. It's not
Very
so much
bland and
her as
passive.
like what
Mm.
she's given to do is just
What
I
everyone's
don't
given
even
to
I
do
don't
is a
know what
big
to say.
problem with it. I think I completely
Yeah,
agree. Leia's a
there's
big
that.
hotspot of that, but that everyone's struggling for what they need to be doing here, to the point where a lot of times it's just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth across the galaxy to tick off plot points, and the telling of that is very
Yeah.
flawed. I completely agree with you on all of the mechanical levels. I would say this is a poorly written story, and with poorly realized characters and poorly actualized existing characters. I'm completely with you on all the technical levels. Where I'm more forgiving of it is that I think that I feel like I'm willing to give it that he tried his absolute best on this, and he just, for whatever reason, he was a young writer. He hadn't developed his craft. He hadn't moved on. I think the intent is positive. He was trying to tell the story and advance it, but and that simply isn't true of the sequels. The sequels just did not care. They were making a film and didn't give a shit about anything to do with the larger world. All the characters, they just do not care. You can see that in every second of the frame of those films. I
Mhm.
don't think that
Okay, so here's a
applies here in the
question.
same way.
Here's a
Yeah, like
question.
there's
Like
this.
For me personally,
there
anyway.
are definitely there are individual scenes in the sequels that I think, and I'm a sequel hater, that I think are far superior to individual scenes in this. Are you do you give more? What do you put more? Um, where's the onus here?
Hmm.
What do you think is more important? Like a skilled craftsman, or literally just the intent with which they set out? Because I think he's a bad writer. I'm sorry to say. Like I don't
I
think it's an
agree.
undeveloped craft. I
No,
think it's just
I
he's
don't
not
think
good at
he's a
writing.
great writer in this either. I think it really it purely comes down to the structure and some of the like you said, intent, structure, and some of the characterization that it's setting the groundwork for. And kind of just like adding to like, the comparison between the sequels, even though I don't like, and again, Luke is like a prime example of this. I don't like how he's written in this trilogy, but at the same time, he doesn't do, I would say, anything that is so beyond the pale of what I could expect Luke Skywalker to do,
Yeah,
like trying to kill his nephew in his sleep, like that
right.
just goes
But
so far beyond anything that I could ever see Luke doing. He doesn't do anything in this trilogy. He does a lot in this trilogy I don't like, but he never goes that far. He never goes so far beyond the pale of what Luke Skywalker as a character should realistically be expected to do in this sort of, and it's not a time frame thing. I'm just talking like just purely character. I think
yeah,
that's the reason it never fully lost me. We never get a him standing over his nephew's bed with a lit saber moment.
Yeah, or
You
abandon
Right.
the whole
kind of
cause
Okay.
because
didn't
he
do
had
that.
one bad thing happen to him. I mean, the biggest crime of Luke Skywalker, and this is what he doesn't do. Like, he just sort of sits
Yes.
passive and lets things happen around him with 12 students that he's left basically
I
completely
consider that a
aimless.
high crime.
I
Yes.
agree. I
Yeah.
agree.
I mean,
I agree.
yeah.
That's the other thing I want to talk about. Like, so even if you talk, because I was giving it more credit for what it's doing in terms of its intent. It's trying to advance the story, which I completely agree with you is a low hanging fruit in the sense that, well, of course he starts the next generation. Of course he tries to bring back the Jedi. It shouldn't get points for that. I'm not meaning to imply it gets points for it in a vacuum. The only reason I'm saying it, I raised that, is because you're mentioning how it's committing a lot of the same crimes as the sequels do, and I again completely agree structurally in terms of the craft it is. But in terms of like the intent of the overall story, I mean, the sequel just said, I don't care about any of that. I'm not doing any of that. Fuck it, moving on. We're just going to reset
I
the clock
think
for no reason. This is actually
I think
trying to
that's
tackle the clock that was given. It was given,
Right.
the setup. It just did it poorly. And the high crime is that if you're going to make a story or a trilogy called the Jedi Academy, it should probably be about the Jedi Academy, and it's barely
right,
in
which
here. And
this
when
is
it
not.
is, it's
Right.
just
Yeah. Well,
things happening
yeah.
around the
That's
building. Like, there are no
So
lessons here. There's
so
no
here's
philosophy to be explored. All there's
I don't know
really
if
is
I'd
about
go
this
that. I don't know if I'd go that far, but we'll get to that when we
within
get
the structure
to
of the
the main
academy. I mean, there are moral lessons
story.
and story lessons involved in the character arcs, etc. But I'm just talking purely
No, but
about the
even then,
academy. He
I wouldn't
barely
necessarily fully agree
Luke,
with you
Luke,
there.
we'll get there as we go for the story, but
yeah,
it's threadbare,
yeah.
I
Sure,
think.
sure, sure,
And
sure.
the main thing here is that the stuff that would later be developed by what comes after, our ideas of the New Jedi Order that comes both from the New Jedi
Yeah.
Order series and as
Again,
well things
yeah.
like Jedi. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to give the credit of that to this book, but the things it allows set up and the ideas behind it.
I
If you
think
just make it better written, and this should have, what comes later should have been here, and that's what I'm saying. It's the detraction of this book.
Okay.
This is the
Right.
Jedi
So
Academy
Right.
trilogy, and it's
you
failing to be that for me.
Evan said this earlier in his opening statement. I think it was the proper way to say it. That he does have like a sort of, he's looking at it in retrospect and kind of happy that it happened for things that come later. And I think that that's completely fair. I also think that it's completely unfair, which I'm not saying you're doing this, Callan, but just in a vacuum, it would be unfair to say, oh, isn't it so great that these
started it
were
off,
written
yeah,
the way
exactly.
that they
Yeah.
are because
God no,
of what came later.
God no,
No,
and that's
no,
why I'm
yeah,
saying
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
with you on
But-
all of the flaws, because that's why I'm the guy in between on this one.
And with the
Evan has a
sequels,
disadvantage
I
here in
wanna
the fact
say-
that he does know all of these stories. I'm still oblivious to most of the stuff that follows this. So these characters, I don't have the details of Karanati and Tion and Streen, etc. But the intent behind them though is given, even though handled very poorly here, enough is delivered here to allow things to come in the future, and there's enough of a framework given. So I see both sides of this.
When it comes to the sequels, I would like to say I think mostly because I'm more accepting of the fact, and then we'll get off this subject and into this soon. Okay, I just want to wrap this up. I'm more understanding of the idea of having to do something that less than ideal because, like, honestly, if in everyone's perfect world, you would have continued those characters' stories well before those actors aged out of the role. You don't really want to see a geriatric Han Solo running around anyway. You just don't. You just don't. Okay, and so there's no, and he was done the best out of those characters, like in those series, which isn't to say he was done especially well. Okay, but the point is, it was just kind of a tragedy. It was a tragedy what happened. Full stop. Okay, and then what I'm saying is with those is I think that the crime is more of a corporate nature. Like it's just this, and you mentioned this before. You've used the word the heart of this. This, for reasons I find difficult to explain, feels the most true to something George Lucas would have written if he were still in the driver's seat. Like there's like a George Lucas quality to this, and everything that I would say about, like, I don't think that the prequels are great movies. The sequels are terrible. There was a time when I would have said the prequels are terrible, and in many ways, I think that they have terrible scenes and just a terrible lack of execution.
Cinematically.
But it is the difference between like an artistic vision and just a corporate for profit spinning out something. I get that, but this is like this middle territory between the two for me, where I'm just like, this really only exists because you're trying to sell a product. Yes, there's a natural story to carry on. That being the story we don't really get the way that we should have, the way that the Jedi.
There's a
this
reason
one in
Jedi is made,
particular,
basically. That's what we're saying.
And,
I
but
agree it's a failure
there
of
is a
art,
George
though.
Lucas.
It's a
Like a George Lucas-y kind of vibe to it, where there's some of this stuff is so weird and kind of
As I
cute
was saying earlier about like
and
Flash Gordon, like sci-fi shorts,
Yeah,
it's
clearly
bizarre.
really
Yeah.
out to pasture, even by Star Wars standards, especially by Star Wars
Mhm.
standards, you might say. What I'm saying here, though, is I agree with you. It's a failure of art. It is a failure to reach as far as it should have done. It is a failed story
But it's more
with
artistic than the sequels, is
yeah,
what I was
yeah,
trying to
but
say.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly,
Yeah, I
exactly.
get that. Yeah.
But it is a reach. They're trying to reach for the art. I agree they've fallen flat and they failed, but the intention is there. And that's what I mean about the heart. You see what was being attempted here. It's just
Mhm.
it does just fall flat on its face on
Yeah.
almost every level. Like, there are very few exceptions. And so,
Yeah.
but you see the ideas behind it
It's
though,
a
and
give and
that's
take. Yeah,
just
it,
completely
Yeah,
absent in the
which is
sequels for
fine.
me.
I mean, yeah,
Completely
we're all
absent.
kind of coming about this at like some different angles, and but I think we are still kind of like unified, and like most of our like general criticisms is just kind of how much we get out of it. That's kind of really where we're all coming from here.
I
But
was never.
getting
Can I just say I was never as miserable going through these as with the sequels, but I also think
Perhaps
these are
more
terrible.
frustrated. Perhaps more frustrated by it
Uh,
because you can see what it's
you
trying
know
and
what?
failing at,
So the sequels,
rather
like
than
I
just completely
said,
detached.
uh, the sequels, sadly, you didn't really want it to be told when it was told. I mean, one of the principal actors passed away, in the middle of like all of it. That just says it all. It should never have happened that way. They never shared the screen together ever. Like, what I mean? It should never have happened that way. Ideally, you would have had this made a lot longer before. There's so many other factors about it.
Mm.
You have a brand that doesn't necessarily care about the lore or the heart or any of it. They're just acquiring it. When you're going to spend that kind of money that they spent to acquire it, of course you're going to put more movies out. Some people like them for some reason. There are competently done scenes. It's not universally terrible, but the things we care about most, it worse than fumbled the ball. So of course we hate it. But there's so many other factors. It wasn't like, and this should have been the case where one person sat down and outlined the whole thing, or one team, I mean to
Mm.
say, and the way that that just didn't happen, where it was a different creative team effectively in charge of each one having to carry like the ball that had been fumbled previously from film to film. It was atrocious. It was a mess. It was horrible. This is one guy with one trilogy, and it's as messy to me. Like, so there's a give and take. It's
Mm.
it's 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 much less harmless. It's harmless effectively because of what comes later from
Mm.
other authors, is what I'm saying. But
Mhm.
I just can't give this more credit than I am. To me, it's a very commonly panned series if you're looking around like places like Goodreads or forums or whatever.
Yeah.
This is not necessarily a trilogy that has aged especially well. It's also not the worst. It's not even the worst Star Wars that I've read, but I mean, but it is. I would go so far as to say that it's not average. I think it's well below average, in my opinion.
Mm. I agree.
And that's not, again, I'm not an argumentative popular person. I'm not saying that the majority, sells this, but it's a common enough
It's a good dipstick
perspective,
measure. Exactly.
Mhm.
It's good to
Yeah,
take a measure
That's
of these
fair.
things. It's
Yeah.
useful for that. Not to
Yeah.
make the
yeah. And
case,
so the
but just
reason
to gauge the intention behind a lot of people with it.
And the
Mhm.
reason I think is I don't want to say that the guy lacks imagination because he comes up with scenarios that I would never, but
Blob races
uh,
anyone?
Yeah,
oh,
yeah, yeah. We'll get to
We'll get
that,
there. We'll get there.
so he's got imagination. There is this sort of streak of something George Lucasy in it that I kind of like for all it's flawed in like a very particular way. That's very hard
Mm.
for me to like.
Mhm.
I think we'll
It's very
get to a lot of
difficult
the
to
roots of it when
articulate.
we go through individual beats, because there are going to be some exceptions to things that we do like, or these things that were
Right.
tried for that we kind of go, okay, I like the idea of this. Let's play with this more. I think
Mhm.
that we'll be able to see
Well,
more of our
yeah.
individual views and where they differ as
Well,
we go
exactly. Like,
through and look at some of
yeah.
this. Because
Well,
particularly with the first
yeah.
book, I found there was a lot in it that I thought, oh, that's really cool, but
Okay,
what? You know?
so on that point, can I just say that this book, it suffers all the criticisms that I've already, or it's hampered by them, I should say, in my opinion, right? But I think it's unambiguously the best of this trilogy, unfortunately. Like this first book, and the reason for that is because the way that the second books carry there are ideas that I like better in those books. The way that they're realized, oh my god, so many notes and just endlessly, and also just the layout of the actual plot. I mean, your story in the third book effectively ended in the middle of the book. Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. So but so this one in terms of writing craft, even though it doesn't really get off the ground in terms of the whole Jedi thing, we were barely with that with this book. I think that this has the most competently done stuff, especially on the
Mm.
Han front. Okay,
Agreed.
so anyway,
Fair.
let's get into
Um,
actual
yeah.
events here.
Mm.
Yeah, well, like with the opening, I just want to say I genuinely like the opening with Luke going into the New Republic Senate. for starters. His proposal. First of all, I do like again, very very minor. Again, you're not going to hear me praise the writing too frequently in these reviews, but what I will say, little bits like the descriptor about the fact that when he took over the Senate, Palpatine like purposefully restructured it so like all of the everyone's eyes would always be looking at him at all times, with the lighting very purposefully shining down on him to make him look more grand. Minor bit, but I do, again, that's so in character for Emperor Palpatine that part of me does kind of like appreciate the fact that they went out of their way to point that out when they took over that area of the Senate. So minor bit. Again, you won't hear me praise the writing too often, but there are bits in there of character that I do genuinely enjoy.
Yeah, little flourishes like that in the setting and the set dressing, I do appreciate. Like, he has some cool ideas for the world, but I mean, not wanting to dwell on the negative too much. But this was the scene that started it for me. I think, from memory, when gives the address, he gives a speech. I'm like, oh Jesus, okay. So this is not a speech that would be given before this amount of people. This is not Luke speaking. This is not the way he would get this message across. This is not the way it would be received, etc. The actual speech was like the klaxon cry of, okay, this book is not going to be well written, on like the prose level, and then later on I found out, of course, the voice level across the board as well.
Right.
So that, but I get what you're saying when it comes to like the idea. It's going to be my repeating theme for this trilogy. It's I get the idea.
The idea is poor execution.
It's just been
that
really
basically
fumbled.
sums it up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I completely agree, and I'm not even willing to give it as much credit as you are. That's the sole difference here. Like, I completely agree with everything you just said. I mean, I like the idea of, I don't like the idea of the scene particularly. The only thing I like about it is that he wanted to make sure everybody was okay with the concept, because it is
on board with it.
controversial.
But
for
he wouldn't
obvious
take it to the
reasons.
public. He would take it to the council, right? He would talk about it. As a
Well,
political
it's the way it
decision.
was voiced.
Yeah, and everyone
Can I just say
receiving it,
also-
like they're like, oh yeah, bring back the knights.
Yeah.
Like, you what? I know this is obviously predating the prequel, so it
Well,
didn't
why would
happen. But yeah,
But wait, why would the New Republic be against bringing back the Knights, Callan? I don't understand why that's an issue.
Well, this
for
is
you.
what I was about to say, because obviously this came out before the prequel, so they didn't know about the whole generations of deterioration and the perceived turning against the Jedi, etc.
Yeah, but this is a New Republic Senate. These are different.
No, I know, of course,
Most of these guys served in the rebellion alongside
They're
Luke.
still celebrating the not quite abdication of responsibility and power, but they're celebrating like the Praetorian Guard kind of coming into the fore. It's not something that people in a burgeoning republic would be too keen on. It's the whole Justice League and Cadmus idea. It's like, let's have Supermen controlling or at least influencing our environment. You know, it's not something that they would be. He's not
proposing that they control the Republic. What are you
talking
about?
But he's bringing in the Jedi Knights to help protect them all and keep them safe and
yeah. Why would they be against
fights,
that?
etc.
That's what I don't understand. You see, you framed it as though that's out of character. I disagree.
I don't think the council is out of character for most of the council. I'm talking about the general senators, like the actual the masses. I think if you raise that question in real life, would you like someone like the Jedi Order to be running things? There would be it would be the Superman.
But they're not
question.
running things. Is what I'm saying.
But influencing things, protecting things, observing things, monitoring things, whatever it is. An unelected body of super powerful people that can control minds is a question that should come up for, in my opinion, a competent world builder.
It kind of does. It's just not an interesting conversation. Like they do kind of like the ones that question him, like, even though it feels like a separate scene, like he's in like a little chamber with it. That's the scene it wants. The scene it really just wants him and like the heads of government.
That's what I was saying about the council.
For a conversation.
It's the fact that it is the open discourse of the assembly that makes it weird for me.
Yeah, it's
no, that's fair. I don't really have a problem with it, but that's fair.
For me. So can I just say, like, it should be talked about more than, I mean, it gestures at this, but I would like more to be done with this. The reason he's seeking permission is because Jedi are dangerous when they go badly. Like, that's the reason why he yes, exactly.
Yeah.
This book has a strange, I think all three books in the trilogy came out in 1994, and I can't tell whether it wants to fully commit to Dark Empire or not. It's just it obviously makes a mention of the fact that Luke has had a brush with the dark side or has fallen to the dark side. They don't really play with the fact that, yeah, effectively Palpatine came back in full force, and they make much more consistent reference to Thrawn, which they call the depredations of Thrawn. It's like, depredations. I mean, like, I mean, okay.
It's like you're not technically wrong, but it's a weird framing. I think it's probably kind of like they were like, let's just not touch that whole Dark Empire thing.
It was
People
that. It
clearly
was that. Yeah,
like
the
the
whole
Thrawn
the whole
trilogy a lot
setting
more.
post Dark Empire was
Yeah.
always. I mean, we have to kind of reference it, but let's pretend that didn't happen and just focus on the good stuff like Thrawn.
But
The stuff they can work with.
I don't
the guy who
necessarily
wrote
blame them
that,
for that.
but the
Mm.
guy who wrote that was like this guy's writing partner, like in his earlier days with Star Wars, because he was involved in Tales of the Jedi. You know
Mm.
what I mean? So it just, far be it from me to complain about the fact that we're basically sidestepping Dark Empire, but it is very much like that brings to the forefront the issue because the Jedi Master, the only Jedi in the galaxy, went to the dark side and betrayed us. Like you know what I mean. So it is very much a
There should
it's
be
a
a
question that
generational
should be
trauma
played with.
involved with the idea of force
Yes.
wielding, super powerful people being involved in the government. And again, biggest proponent of the Jedi here. I'm fully on board with a wise and well organized and powerful elite having an influence where it's as long as there are safeguards. But the problem is that
Well,
the average public, their only experience of that for the last however many years it's been, is Darth Vader, Emperor,
I
when that
don't
was
even
revealed as him being
I,
actually magically
I'm
powerful.
even
All that stuff.
honestly, I'm even okay with it being kind of a fringe opinion that people aren't comfortable with it. I don't care about the word how the majority swings.
Agreed.
I would just appreciate a more interestingly handled conversation. That's all I want. You
Yeah.
know what I
Agreed.
because it is the case that Luke has saved the galaxy. He's also, like I said, in Dark Empire, betrayed the galaxy. But I mean,
And saved it again.
generationally, the history of the Jedi has been,
Fractious.
it vibrates towards the good and the just and everything. Fractious, yes, but I mean, but Jedi, the reputation of the Jedi, whether you believe in this for world building reasons or not, and I'm talking generally to the audience, not to you,
Mm.
Kellen, the reputation of the Jedi, by and large, has survived, like
Yeah.
intact throughout the
1,000
thousands of years.
generations of peace and justice. That leaves
Yes,
its
Yeah.
lingering nature. And when they were destroyed, they had the Imperial times and the Dark times, and then now the Empire's gone. Do they
And
want
mind you,
to bring
even
it back? I get that the idea of him bringing it back
and
for
even
sure.
during the imperial period, you had people who were still supporting the Jedi, like covertly, but were still in favor of what they represented. So even at their worst, there were still supporters there. That's nothing new.
Of course,
yeah.
I didn't mean to completely derail us on this point anyway. So it was just a point, like you said, Matt. I would have handled the
I
conversation differently
yes,
and
yes,
more
I
interestingly
would
as
have
a
liked
result.
a
And
more.
also, but
The
also
writing's the issue,
not
not
just
the
for
intent.
but not just for world building reasons as well. I wanted to go on to this point. It was also for the setup of the kind of things you're going to be addressing within the trilogy. If this is
Agree
going to be
with
a
you.
trilogy
Yes.
about a Jedi Academy and all of the problems involved with that, not least the fact that the
Yes.
Jedi Master running it himself has fallen to the dark side after being the paragon
Yes.
that didn't. It's something that it needs to be worried about. And if we're going to tackle it and have students stumble or even fall, then we need to have the conversation at the very, at the opening the story with the conversation of the risks and how it's going to be managed, etc. I think it was a
Completely agree.
misstep to lose that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
No,
I
that's
think
fair.
I would like to say that you mentioned the fact that these are prequel in terms of their release, and so they were working with I would hesitate to say antiquated lore and more just stuff that wasn't
It was nebulous.
really
It was a bit,
articulated,
yeah.
yeah, because I do like the fact that they question Luke. I don't like his language. We've talked about several times at this point that the voice of the major characters is weak or just not there. It's also the case that it's just the way the guy writes. No character has a particularly great voice, including the ones that he gives a bit of business or the ones he invented. Okay, so no one has he's not strong in that on that score, like just as I would say maybe as a novelist, because I have liked some of his comic books, so maybe this just isn't his medium for me. But because it's
Possible.
not like the dialogue is all terrible, it is specifically voice, although there is some bad dialogue, but we'll get into that later. But my point is, in a Star Wars, in the setting like this, in the specific setting of Star Wars, you can't get around the fact that Jedi or something like it are going to be a thing because they are just born. They are part of the nature of the setting, and so it's going to be an ethical dilemma what you do with that. Um, do you allow them to operate freely? Do you try to imprison them? Do you try to exterminate them? Like what do you do? Like I'm not obviously there. I don't want to advocate for that one, but I mean the idea that the reason why there's a reason why Kreia is as interesting a villain as she is, an antagonist as she is, like in the events of KOTOR 2, because she seeks the end of the Force, because she thinks invariably it leads to more pain than uh, well, the good and the moral and the just. She thinks there's always too much danger of it going badly, right? So that is the reason why I think it's good that we're at least gesturing in that direction. I would just, as you said, Colin, I would like that to be the substance of this entire book. I would like that ethical question to be there, and instead it's hampered by I mean, it becomes like a Jedi search that I think is just sort of too easy and also kind of not particularly interesting. And how
Saturday
we
night
get there is
cartoon as
based
well.
around yeah, and how we get there is based
Funny.
around ideas of the kind that are like, well, I do like that they question Luke, like, how do you know what a Jedi is going to be if you yourself didn't know you were one? And his answers to that are kind of based on,
Yeah.
you know,
The little nub, the little force nub that you flick and it'll respond. That
Well, I
was
mean, to be fair,
oh
I mean, tying like his like finding of other Force users to his like early studies with Leia. I do from a character
yeah,
level like that makes
sorry,
sense. I
yeah,
think like the training that they had. Oh, sorry.
I wasn't trying to complain about that specifically. It was like he was suggesting at one point that 3PO and R2 just look through the data banks for weird science, which I thought was hilarious.
mm,
And then it
I mean,
became well, you have the entire republic. That's the best you can come up with. But and then it's like, and then also they didn't have the language of midichlorians, which of course I don't. I'm not going to complain about that. But they were
oh
very
yeah, the whole
much gesturing.
the blood test thing. Yes.
mm,
They had some kind of proto blood test going on, and then they all and it does. I think this is the reason why midichlorians I think just don't really make aside from the fact that I prefer a more mystical expression of the force. Um, and it's not completely robbed by the midichlorians. It's a conversation we've had many times, but the
mm,
reason why I ultimately find it kind of circular is this is under the presumption that pretty much every Jedi that's around is comes from Jedi stock, and it's
mm.
just like, well, then George Lucas came in and introduced midichlorians and made the order celibate, so it didn't really make a lot of sense. It's never made that much sense. So like it just has to be that the Force it manifests
Is
through
yeah.
newborn people somehow, some way, and whether it's a biological component or not, you're going to get the force popping up here and there, which
Mm.
I'm fine to leave it at that.
Yeah, for sure. And
And I
even
know that's a
even like
problem,
the
but
idea of different concentrations of it through the fact that families are more powerful, forceful beings are
that's fine.
blended
Yeah,
together.
for
You
whatever
know,
Yeah.
reason.
they
Yeah,
can be that
Yeah.
genetic component. You just don't need to like
Yeah.
shine a light on it. You don't need to focus
Sure.
on it and give it a
But even
name. You know,
yeah.
it works without
But
being
even him
described.
like repurposing some of like the Empire's old like tech that they used to like track Jedi for like the purpose of discovering new Jedi. I think that's I mean, it's a very basic plot line, but it does kind of add like some
it,
history and some like broader context like to the world, which is something I'm fine with. I never had too much of an issue, and obviously that would also be. I mean, you could even say with midi chlorians that would later be expanded upon, obviously with what we see in Phantom Menace with like the blood test and whatnot. So again, they do just enough to like make me buy him go the methods they use to find these people. So it never I wouldn't say it necessarily took me out of it.
It brings up multiple methods for one, which I like. I like the fact that this is a problem you're attacking from different directions. But the issue I have with it is the fact that, okay, how are we going to solve this problem? Oh, we stumble in the next page into a thing where it gives us all the information. I accidentally happen, after years of training with Leia, accidentally happened to find the one thing that lets me trigger it potentially. I pick up a metal detector in this random lab that we've just found, clearing through a bunch of random building rubble, and happen to find this exact thing that means, oh, it's a force
Yeah, the plot
detector, woo,
convenience is very
which then
strong.
gets
Yep.
just dropped later on anyway. The blood testing and having just R2 and C3PO for some reasons looking for this, despite the fact that, like Matt said, he's got the whole resources of the Republic behind him to make this work, and they've clearly got the public support for wanting it to work, etc. So it's just all the clunkiness of how it's introduced. For my money, it would have been first book he's struggling to find even a handful of Jedi, like the three that he finds, and then book 2 you find some way of maybe working in
Expanding the
concert with my
search.
fellow
Yeah.
Jedi now, we can expand the search and hone things, and it gets a little bit easier for us. And you can up the pacing then, and maybe have a few time skips to kind of show that the academy not growing to the point where it's a fully established academy, because you want that to be the end of the trilogy, which you can then lead through into more follow-up stories. But you just have it gradually expanding more than just the initial starting point, from search to apprentice to champions, etc. It was all. I have this problem, I need to solve it. Moving on to the next page, we've solved it. It was like you said before, Matt. It's very kind of comic book in how it's approaching the pacing and the speed of the story. It's kind of it's clear that he has experience from that medium that he's bringing here, I think, and there's maybe a disconnect between his skill sets there.
Yeah, and I think
yeah.
honestly that leads into like structurally like one of the biggest issues. Like I do feel like as they're presented, I think all of these books are too long. Like you could cut out massive portions of this and honestly
Uh,
tighten it quite a bit. And I honestly think a lot
yeah.
would be helped from a structural perspective. Because like you were saying, if this was like a comic book and it's like, oh, we have to one issue, this is the problem, next issue, this is how we solve it,
Mm.
next issue. And also again, like a broader criticism I have with this trilogy too is like the transitions between sequences are very abrupt, so much so that it really does almost feel like if this was a comic book, like, okay, you're reading Luke's adventure, come back next month for Leia's adventure, come back next
Exactly.
month
Very,
for,
very
and
flip switchy.
you can do that in a comic book because of how the medium is structured, just by its nature.
Yeah.
So again, I would actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I would be genuinely curious to see what a comic book adaptation of this trilogy written by this author would actually look like.
I think it would
I'm
work
almost
a lot
surprised
better.
there wasn't one.
Yeah, I think it would work
Yeah,
a
the
lot
more I
better.
think about it, the more I think that probably would have been better,
I want the
And I
books this
also-
length. I don't want them shortened, but you're right that if you're going to tell this structured story, it works better much shortened. I think it definitely is the case. I would
Yeah,
just completely think
I-
about the entire thing completely differently.
They're like standard book length, but it is how he's chosen to stuff in there is a waste of a lot of time. I was going to bring
Yeah.
that up is that I have not tested this out myself, so I don't know firsthand, but I feel like if they ever on like Audible or whatever service you're using for like audiobooks, if that's your thing, if they're only offered in abridged, okay? If they're ever offered as like a package deal, like all three for one credit or something, I feel like you can get the gist of all this with a great deal cut out, and you'll still get pretty much the full story because so much of it. I would like to say at this point, just to make it very clear, in this first book, which I've said is the best of these, in my opinion, that when I say the best, it's because it commits the fewest crimes on the writing level. Like in terms of like the lore, the full depth of it is you need the full trilogy for it, even though I don't think it's
Mhm.
particularly deep. Okay, or a little bit mishandled in some areas and just squandered potential in others, in my opinion. But this first book, I like Han's adventure and everything like that. I don't like anything to do with Leia throughout this entire trilogy. I just think he had no interest in her whatsoever as a character. I think a lot of what she's given to do is I don't think I didn't get like an absolute like just like overpowering whiff of misogyny or anything like that, but it very much like the female characters in general, even Dala, like to a huge extent, there's just a lot of
It's definitely
just
weaker
sort of
on that front.
implicit sexism or just like
I'm with you on that. I don't think it is actual sexism, but it just gives off all of the symptoms if he was sexist. That's how it feels. And I think that
It
comes from the
feels-
negative aspect of the writing.
I do think that I think that there is an element of casual sexism in here, and it's mostly just from weak writing. I don't think he's a sexist.
That's what I mean.
Okay, that's not what I'm saying.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Like the characters, they're poorly realized. The business that they're given is usually pretty bad. Leia is like, I don't know. She's
Lacking
like
in guiding star, if nothing else. He hasn't got a set trajectory for them the same way he does with everyone else. They're just kind of the in-between characters that are bouncing between
This
It's
is
usually stuff either-
Leia, okay, and
Yeah.
she is a housewife or something who's like she's upset her husband's not around, and unless he is around, but they're still not doing anything that they should be doing. She's trying to raise these kids, sort of, even though she's not with them most of the time.
God,
And,
we've got to get
I
to
mean,
that at some point as well.
Yeah, well, no, we will.
But,
I mean, we can.
but and also the character's beauty, like Mara is.
Oh yeah, how many
She
generous
gets the
curve?
shaft
Yeah, how
in
many
this, like,
generous
yeah.
curve mentions can you get in this series? I mean,
Yeah,
Jesus.
and that's not just for her, but
I
it's her
know.
every appearance. By the way, like this guy did not understand that character, or just did not care about that character, like just at all. Like I don't know. So that's a whole separate thing. But the only stuff I really appreciate in this first book is like the Han Kessel Chewie into Kip stuff. I think that's pretty well done. And Kip becomes one of my for the series at some point, but in this first book, I think
Ironic.
he works pretty well.
Yeah.
Well, I hate. Yeah, I'm sorry. I hate
Honestly,
the
no.
events that
Honestly,
they
going
did.
into this trilogy, like I was genuinely thinking, like expecting to like dislike Kip quite a bit, but he was actually not nearly as bad as I was expecting him to be when I went back into this.
In that
I'm not
first
saying
book,
he's
for
done
sure.
great, but at
That
the
first
same
book,
time,
for
sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
he's I guess again expectations. I expected him to be 100 times worse than I did going back into this because like one of the memories I had of like this trilogy from my childhood was like, oh, I thought Kip was ridiculous, and like, yeah, he is kind of ridiculous, but he's not as ridiculous as I was expecting. So I'll give him
They
that. If you
somehow
want-
managed to give the guy the Exar Kun disco cape. I mean, they managed to do that in the most ridiculously
I don't even
stupid
care
but
about that.
fits
I
way.
know, I mean, I
no,
don't
I know.
think- I
It's
don't
by
think
far
that's
the least of the
much of an
problems,
issue.
but it's just
I'll give him
hilarious to
that.
me.
Yeah, but do we want to kind of go into like Han's plot? You know,
Sure.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
talk
Well,
about
this
that's
point.
it's a logical place to start because it's where the book kind of opens plot wise, isn't it? But
yeah.
I just want to say I agree with Matt. I like this stuff, but to me, it goes on way too long for the what the story is supposed to be
I
talking
agree.
about. Like,
Yeah,
I
I
agree.
like the length. I think it's paced well. I think it's handled well. But this is not the story this should be happening in. It just isn't.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, like the oppressive nature of the spice mines is decently portrayed. And the actual dynamic between, I will say this, like I like the character beats in between Han and Kip. I do like the fact that like just their how do I explain this? You understand my issues with Kip as a character in this aside. I do like the framing of okay, I can see how these two would form a connection in this situation just on the get go because Han is
Yes.
somebody who value like not just in that situation, Han being someone who values the ability to survive, the ability to think on your feet. That sort of again, it's like because Kip at this point, for all intents and purposes, is like a younger Han. Like I need to do what I need to do in order to survive. This is just how things are here. But I have these skills that gets me from the day to day. I appreciate that, and it does very much come off like sort of a mentor student dynamic in this harsh Kessel situation. And granted, Kip having his level of development because Vima taught him things in the mind, it feels very because like that is like a textbook example of okay, we need Kip to be able to do certain things, but we don't need him so advanced that he could just get Han out of this situation with a wave of his hand. The level of contrivancy with that was like, oh, that was rough. Like you're telling me that Vima
Particularly to
somehow
then never use her again the entire rest of the trilogy. Like there was
yeah,
no
what
relevance of
was
her
that?
whatsoever. I mean, that's just
pretty much the
objectively a
series, yeah.
terrible writing decision.
Yeah, that was painful. But at the same, that aside, I do like their interactions in the Kessel sequences, and I do genuinely buy their friendship by the end of this book and going forward through this trilogy. So I want again credit where it's due because he comes off as reasonably frustrated, but also reasonably competent to the point where he does not feel Mary Sue-ish, but at the same time, he has that thread of competence to his actions that Han appreciates, and as such, allowing them to form that relationship early on. I think structurally it's well handled.
I would just like to say I think that is true in the context of this book, which is what
Agreed.
we're talking about
Yeah,
today. So
exactly.
it's a fair thing. But what you just said, the whole Mary Sue angle, his relationship with Han, those are common complaints of the latter two books, and I think that they
Yes.
stand.
Yeah,
I do think
agreed.
that they stand. So
Yes,
We'll
but
get to that
he is
later.
the least offensive here, so I'll give credit where
I like him
where
in this book.
Mm.
I actively like the whole plot. That's why it got more
It's just
disjointed.
it's the
and
fact that you're enjoying
weird
it
as
so
it
much
went
all
on.
the while it's not relevant. Like this is a Jedi Academy
It's not
trilogy
relevant.
book. Why are we talking
It's
about Han in the
relevant in
cave
the
with a box
It's
of
relevant in
scraps?
the sense that he's run into Kip, who will go on to join the Praxium, right?
Yeah.
Like that's so.
But like
If you
two-thirds of
structure
the
the
book, pretty
idea,
much.
if you structured, if you well, again, see my previous complaints. I'm
Yeah.
very much the hater here. Like everything comes with that caveat. Everything comes with that caveat, right? Like so, I'm trying to say that's the idea. That's the execution that I
Yeah.
think is done well. Even though I think it should be at best maybe half the book and the other half be Luke stuff, or more more particularly about 2/3 to 3/4 of it being Luke and the rest this. But given how we've done this, given what I have to sort, given the blob races coming up,
Yeah,
this,
okay,
I
fair.
think
Yeah,
We'll get to that in a
100%. Yeah.
second,
I'm with you. I'm wholly with you. It's definitely the best
Yeah.
part of the trilogy in terms of how it's handled, as long as you ignore the fact that
Can we
it shouldn't
talk
have been
about
handled
Lando?
this way.
Can we just get Lando out of the way?
Yeah, Lando's
Sure,
really
do
easy.
we want
Well-
yeah, before we move into Lando, I just want to say one thing. Those sequences also have admittedly one of my favorite POVs in this trilogy, where they're racing through the darkness of the mines, and it describes his vision as like gradually fading to the point where all he can feel is the momentum around him in like pitch blackness. I don't know why, but the way that POV was framed, I could instantly feel like, oh, like imagine you're going like, I don't know, maybe you're on like a roller coaster or something, and like you go through a tunnel and it's just pitch, but you can still feel the momentum behind you. I don't know why, but the way that was framed, I could instantly picture in my head what Han was feeling in that moment. And so that was well done. Again,
it was pretty strong.
like I said at the beginning,
Yeah.
there aren't going to be very moments where I praise the actual writing setup, but that was one of them because I could instantly think in my head, oh, this is how that feels. It was very it was very ironically, because it's Han, it did feel like something out of Indiana Jones, but in a good
Mhm.
way.
Yeah, it was very strong compared to the rest of this trilogy, for sure. I think that this entire section of the book, I think this was the thing that got the most attention from him as a writer. I think the speed at which he was writing everything else massively picked up, I would guess, compared to how it's being realized later on. Or if not that, then he had a better grasp of how he wanted to realize this particular environment and this particular scenario. Like, he was most engaged and interested in this part, it would seem to me. It's just,
Yeah.
it's the
I
weird
think it's
thing to put
that.
in this.
I
Yeah.
It's the
And
engagement and interested in for
yeah.
me,
Yeah.
for my money. That's what I think. Because I think when he's not interested in something, it shows. And there things like well, we'll get to Lando when we get to him. If you want to get to him next or later, that's
And
fine. I
just
would just like to
yeah.
say there are parts of his writing that I think where he shines is I think a scene that he actively enjoyed. Okay, we're like or business or subject matter that he enjoyed more than others, and other things. If I take him at his most charitable, I would just say, yeah, he's just not into that. If I was predisposed to assuming the worst of him, I would say he either has contempt for the character or the reader. Which I don't want to say that about him, but there were times where it was just like, this is so. What are you doing? Like I can't come
Yeah.
up with another scenario for it. But anyway,
Mhm.
we can carry on.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I'll praise the writing where it comes at certain, points, and you do feel like he does have, like, a level of investment in very specific characters, kind of like what I alluded to, at the beginning. Also, this is a very minor thing to point out just in terms of writing, but for some reason, something that kinda stuck out to me reading this trilogy is the way he describes colors, specifically colors in relation to landscapes. I don't know why, but like his ability, like when he's describing like the rustic oranges of, Kessel, or like the sort of shiny greens of like the Yavin forest, or like the sort of deep, oranges of the Ma installation, or like Exar Kun when he's like manifesting. It describes him as like being like an onyx black that is simultaneously shiny but also sucking in all the light. I don't know why that stood out to me, but for some reason it's not prosaic, but the descriptors he uses when describing colors of like landscapes or just kind of colors in general. I don't know why. I'm not saying it was amazing, but that's
No,
just
no, yeah.
something.
Yeah.
It's a technique he
I
uses a lot in this trilogy, and it kind of. I will say
again,
this: it did help like form mental images in my head of what some of these areas.
comic book.
Yeah, I was about to
Yes.
He
say,
belongs writing a comic book, okay?
yeah.
Yeah.
And also, and some of it is more helpful to an artist because some of it is vague. At one point, and I think it was in the
It's
third book,
broad
he
stroke. It's broad stroke flourishes in the
in the
environments that
third
he's good with.
in the
Mhm.
third book, at one point, he described someone's eyes, a woman's, of course, which is fine, whatever, but as the color of expensive gemstones. That's not a color. But you know what? But if you wanted if you wanted the artist to render that, whatever the color is, because it would just be known at that point, that would be a helpful description of like how to make them vibrant and shine, and you know what I mean, like in your actual panel work.
Mm.
But it's not an actual color.
And I think it is worth pointing out, like, with that too, like, this trilogy, there's a lot of illustrations out there from, like, various things, and the level of like, I don't know who did the illustrations, like, off the top of my head, but a lot of them are very, vivid, not just in just, like, design, but like I was saying, like, with color. Like, you could instantly, like, see the connection between that, and I think that does speak to that strength, like you were saying, Matt, like, that sort of comic booky,
Yeah,
use of the
Mm.
gradient as it stands, which again, like this probably should have been a comic series.
he's used to describing to the artist, here's what you're looking for, because
Yeah, and
I
they fill
think
in the blanks.
people don't necessarily realize that, even though it is pretty obvious when you think about it, the actual writer has to set like notes for the artist to render. Like, it's not just here's my dialogue and you just write Spider-Man doing whatever. It's like I'm writing Peter Parker's in his bedroom doing specifically something when somebody's at the window, or what, you know what I mean, whatever. Like, you have to, that's stuff that you will never read, but it's what the artist needs to render. So he's clearly very used to that, and I would argue talented in that uh in that with that skill. You know what I mean? I think that
Mm.
that's up his alley.
Yeah, completely agree. All of the kind of the broad stroke rendering of environments and stuff, and the things that skill that helps, particularly in the up-rendering of artwork in comics. I think you do see that come across in the writing here, so it's good that we praised them for that. Because yeah, there are glimmers of things here and there, like you said, Evan. The actualization of the visuals here, I think it works very well. Not just the Kessel environment here, but Mon Calamari Sea for book 2, and some of the stuff with the Morse installation as well. Like you mentioned, all that stuff. He is doing some good work here and there. Before we move on past the actual kind of Kessel, Han, Kip situation, though, there was a particular question I noted as I was originally reading the book that I wanted to flag with you guys, and this kind of goes more broadly into the larger question of the issue of voice for the characters. But I particularly had the question of with this section for Han, did he seem young to you guys? Did it read as very young Han rather than an elder one that is moving on a bit? I mean, I think read him as younger than even the originals. Bear in mind, like early 20s vibe I was getting from this portion of the book. Was that just me?
I wouldn't say young, although if you don't mind me hazarding a guess on why you feel that way, he does make a lot of callbacks to things we've already seen in the films or like kind of know from his past in these sequences. So it could be that he was kind of reading that because of the references. That's just a guess on my part, but
Maybe, yeah.
no, I would say for me he came off as like broadly as old as he should be here.
Fair enough. It may just have been a case of like the discrepancy in the voice that I hadn't quite, calibrated for by that stage. But it was reading for me as a very young Han here. See what you think of the comments, guys. If it was anyone was just me or not, I'd be interested to hear about that. But yeah, sorry, we want to move on to Lando. You want to take us where that, Evan?
Well, I mean, Callan, I mean, we've mentioned in a lot of like recent book reviews that Lando has been a highlight for you in particular. I'm assuming that wasn't as
not
much the
so
case
here. Lando just took a nosedive off a cliff and just became caricature and creepy at points and weird. And for some reason, in this, he's looking up blob races.
I will say, like, blob races aside, he very much reads to me like you were in a conversation with somebody who had never seen Lando before, and you were trying to describe what Lando as a character is.
It's a good way of putting it.
He's
a very good way of putting it.
He's a suave, funny guy played by Billy D. Williams, and he does this. Isn't he so cool? And then they just took that and ran with it without really remembering any of the substance.
That's honestly, that's what I was trying to gesture at way earlier on. Most characters feel that way to me for one reason or another. Han doesn't suffer from that quite. He's just mostly a lack of even though I like him the best in this book, it was sort of that lack of voice, that lack of real strong character presence on page. What you just said, though, I think applies to an awful lot of people, and nobody suffers from it more than Lando from the originals, from like the original main cast. I would say, he has been up to this point a high point of other books that we've looked at. I don't think he needs to be here. No. I don't think he needs to be here. I mean, it's
completely irrelevant. The book actively struggles throughout the entire trilogy to find things for him to do. This one in particular, I mean, we talked about the first book being the greatest of the three.
No, the second one in particular is horrible.
But this one as well. I mean, he's
there was really only one moment in this book in particular where I even got anything resembling classic like Lando energy, and that's when Leia invites him in. It describes him as like entering in with a flourish with his cape, doing all sort of this sort of thing. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's kind of is what he does. And when you first see him in Empire Strikes Back, so
when you first see him,
it's Lando with no character development.
Everything else from there is completely off base. Unfortunately, it's really, again, it feels like this was written by somebody who just got the broad strokes of what Lando was from like a buddy and like at a conversation at like the bar or something, and that's basically it.
That and more broadly for the whole character, I think it's like you say, it's the first impression of the characters. I mean, particularly with Luke as well. It's the character prior to any of their development. In films, in some cases, and even most particularly outside of the films, like we don't even when things like Luke's running up to Han a few times and like the hangar scene was like, "Han, oh buddy," kind of giving the hug. So it replicates that scene like 3 times throughout the trilogy, I think. At least 2 anyway.
That's true.
That's not the
I
Luke
agree,
of this day at this point. He's not that person anymore. Even though I like the idea of tapping into that energy a little bit, don't get me wrong, it's just not handled properly.
No, that's true. I agree, but at the same time, I think the reason Lando I think is worse for me than characters like Luke is like at least with Luke and Han, I can at least envision scenarios where they do the things that they do in this book. Lando just doesn't even get that much of a pass from me. He just
completely agree. This is the worst case, for sure.
Yeah, like I can't even think, oh yeah, that's something Lando would do if this was written by somebody else. I can't even give him that credit.
He's purely padding all throughout, and in this book, it's the weirdest case of it. I thought it would be the most offensive, but it's not, because the business that he has with Han in book 2 we'll get to, but that just pissed me off to no end. But this
so
one,
annoyed by that.
Yeah, let's just get into the blob races at this point, because basically the main impetus is like Leia puts him on a scouting mission to potentially find a Jedi. He with the same device that they discovered earlier in the book, and of course he gets C-3PO tags along because that's the dynamic that we're all really itching to see in this. But it turns out
got to pair everyone up with everyone, haven't we, for this trilogy?
Yeah, which is like, I mean, look, I'm totally fine with like mixing up the cast in like every which way. I mean, that's never been a problem with me in theory, but
Agreed.
in application, their dynamic just seems like, I don't even know, like I was gonna say like slapstick, but I can't even give it that justification. It just feels like why make the decisions that you made for this entire sequence? Because him going to find a potential Jedi and him failing, that's fine in theory. If it ultimately progresses to something that might come up later, but it doesn't even have that. This
That's
is
not
literally
true.
just
That's not true. This guy and the
What?
Duchess, they turn up in the final scene of the last book. It's all
Oh
comes
yeah,
full
yeah,
circle.
yeah.
It's very important and very relevant. Evan.
Character. Oh, sure,
Okay,
sure. Okay,
so
maybe
Winter and Akbar
maybe
talk about it and everything.
Sure. Which okay, yeah, okay, fine. But I guess there's
Sorry,
that. But
didn't mean
again,
to
it's like
derail.
what is the genuine point of this entire sequence?
nothing. Like okay, it was. I mean,
Han gets 1 million credits out of it, I suppose, if you want to be really generous. But what would you need
yeah.
that for in that context?
Wait, Han or Lando?
Sorry,
Lando.
Lando. Sorry, Lando.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, yeah.
misspoke.
All right,
Because
I was gonna say-
he ultimately basically, okay, he has the money, so he has the funds to ultimately invest in the Kessel thing later on to get his business back up. That's literally the only point.
He could have come by it
Any other way.
like any other way.
Mm.
The actual 3PO 3PO's voice comes and goes. 3PO is kind of one of the easier characters to mimic. And also he's only got one mode really. So I mean, it's kind of easy to get right.
He's horribly
but
abused in this trilogy, though, right? Do we agree? Like people got really mean to 3PO. He even calls it
always mean to
out in the
3PO.
third book.
Yeah,
He
I mean,
does kind of, no, I'm kind of with Callan on that one. He kind of gets put through the ringer a bit more than he should, I would
is that
argue.
just by virtue of being party to stupid plot points, though? I mean, like he's always
Probably,
kind of
yeah.
like the butt end of the joke, or the butt of the joke. But and also just because the Jedi babies babysitting gone awry and just ill
Sure.
considered.
Well, again, we'll get to that.
Anyway, so
We'll get to the babies.
But the point being,
Toddlers.
it is the page count is horrible because it
Yeah,
goes on forever.
it's
It goes on
crazy.
forever, and it's minute detail of I don't know whatever this is. But the point being, though, is that this guy, this target, this lead comes to nothing. Like so, I
Mhm.
mean, he doesn't end up being a Jedi candidate. Okay, and not only that, I thought you would be more predisposed to hating this. His predicament, Callan, it's the kind of thing you've called out in other works many such times. He's in like an abusive relationship. I would have
Yeah.
thought you would take much more offense to
I do.
what's going on here.
It's frustrating and horrific in the way it's portrayed, and especially how
and it's
it's
played for
as a
laughs,
joke.
which is really uncomfortable.
But I just in terms of like the
So tell me
overall
why it's
impact on
not
the
offensive
trilogy.
then.
No, it is. I'm just saying it's not in terms of the extremes of what this trilogy will go on to do as a whole. It's not. It's like it's the time sink is the biggest.
In
crime.
the
The fact that it's
examination of this book, sir, that's
No,
what's
no,
on
I-
trial
Yes, yeah,
here.
no, I know,
Like,
no, I know.
tell me.
We were talking about
I'm
it in the
with-
context
I'm
of the
with Matt on
trilogy at the
this one.
time. Is what I'm saying. It was not the same thing as
Yeah.
as the focus on this one. But I completely agree. It's probably the single biggest failing. I mean, it is the single biggest failing of this book. I mean, just looking at it in
Yeah,
isolation.
no,
But
the
trilogy as
blob
a whole is
suck,
what I was
but like
talking about
this
before.
dynamic with the Duchess and this fake gambler guy, that is like legitimately bad.
Yeah, and
like,
it doesn't
Lando
resolve.
effectively
And
sells him back into like slavery.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
and
Like,
laughs
it's-
about
it's-
it. It's like it's making
Yeah,
it's horrific, and it's
terrible.
the
And
imbalance. of-
C-3PO even tries to call him out on it, and he just brushes him aside. It's like, again, like what are we trying to say here? Like what are
This
we
is why I don't
reinforcing?
think that this guy thought things through. It would surprise me if when he was writing any of these that he like read his work 2 or 3 times to make sure it was all
Mm.
copacetic. Like it just feels so. We'll go down this road and just have him do a bit of like light business. And to him, this is pretty like surface level stuff, and it is in a lot of ways. But if you actually think about like the morality here or the lack thereof or like the motivations of the characters or why you're choosing to spend this much time, to me that's where it gets into the whole package is
Completely
egregious,
agreed,
and I just
completely
don't
agreed.
get why it's there.
Yeah.
And the point on top of all of that as well is if you're trying to sell the idea of okay, they're going to fail sometimes. It's going to be hard to find some Jedi. There are going to be stumbling blocks, and you were trying to sell that as part of the story. One, it wouldn't go on this long, especially not with Lando at the helm. And two, it would go somewhere. You'd have it be other people that have failed to find it. You'd have it be that this is you're trying to get across the idea that there's like 2 or 3 you might find in the first 2 books or something. In how this is really going to be a struggle for you, and for Luke in particular. But it doesn't do that, because the rest of the book is Luke just stumbling on to a bunch of Jedi with casual ease, and Lando is in a complete irrelevancy. That even tried is basically an irrelevancy. There's no like, oh, thanks Lando for doing me a favor, etc. And which is all he's doing this for. He's like, oh, I guess I've got some time to kill. I might as well go help Luke out. Why not? It just comes to nothing. On top of the packaging that we've already talked about with the blob racing that just is so not Star Wars, and the morality of the being so basically back into abusive slavery, like you say.
Yeah, no, that's the blob races are like not the most offensive part of that. It's the whole thing with the Duchess and the gambler guy. Like I was saying before, like that's legitimately bad. Like there's and the fact that it's and also the fact that it's Lando who agrees with this. Like Lando, who should be above this sort of like. I mean, you could if you had to do this story, and I'm not saying you should, but if you wanted to actually have it be where like Lando is in a legitimate moral dilemma, and maybe we get callbacks to maybe his past history of double dealing and selling people out, which by the way we see in Empire Strikes Back. He sells Han out to the Empire, and if you wanted to have a callback back to that in the sense of like, no, like that's not who I am anymore. I failed someone in the past. I'm not gonna do that again. Hey, buddy, you're free to go. 3PO, we'll get the money another way. That actually would have been an interesting character moment for Lando. Instead, they take this horrific situation and they, like you said, play it for laughs, and it's just uncomfortable. It makes Lando look like a dick, like a total dick. I'm sorry.
I would like to say that this trilogy in particular, and we've mentioned this in a few of the things that we've looked at recently. I'm trying to be conscious of the fact that some of this stuff is being very much written with the idea that children will read it. And so that means that this idea of writing for kids, I don't necessarily have any business looking for war and peace when I open one of these books. Okay, like that's fair enough. Some of this is very much like sort of B grade quality, at best, which is all it's like even aiming for some of the time, or it's sort of pulpy or schmaltzy or just whatever. This, even if you want to say it's for kids, and you can, and I don't want to necessarily say that what's written for kids or rendered for kids needs to be dumbed down, but even if you're looking at it from that perspective of this is for kids, what's the message to kids here about Lando or this situation or any of it? Like, what's the moral here? Like, what it's so confused. It's like you are aware that like Lando's one of the heroes, right? He's not like some scallywag kind of like neutral, it comes and goes. He's part of the main team here. I mean, if Han can make a character progression over the course of the main trilogy, so can Lando, and they certainly do by the time you're in Jedi together. I mean, that's the whole point of not leaving Han to rot in Jabba's dungeon, right? It's like we're doing this because it's right? You could argue that it's a misspent use of Republic resources for just saving one guy. You could make that case, but that's not that's a logistic, world building, logical thing in terms of like the heart and soul of what this story is about and what makes these characters heroes. This is worse than negligence. You know what I mean? Like this is doing active harm.
Yeah, he's actively making the rules himself. Yeah.
This is sequel tier, character assassination. If we mentioned before, this to 100% that. So yeah,
and a waste of time. That is the worst thing, but it's also just a plain waste of time. It doesn't come to anything other than getting credits. But literally, I mean, how many times does the Falcon get gambled away and won again over the course of these books?
Again, we'll get to that when we get to the second book.
I know. I just mean to say that if you just needed him to get credits, that could happen anyway. Like there's any way.
You're at a blob race. Just have him win a race.
Well, yeah, exactly. Or he just walks onto page the first time we see him. Leia, I'm celebrating. I've just won all his money. I'm going to go jumping into this new venture. I'm heading over to Kessel. And he's like, oh, you may not want to do that, Lando. We've got these problems. Oh, I'm in the plot suddenly. I'm going to go save Han. Done. Like it's as simple as that for what it actually achieves, and yet we spend 3 chapters worth effectively of plot length.
Feels like 30.
I know that this book kind of just we talked about before we started. Callan had mentioned the fact that the events of these books kind of bleed together. So can we just kind of talk a little bit more about Luke and then sort of Dala, and then kind of move on to like
Yeah, well, that
the
and then the
next?
introduction of each of the Jedi
Sure.
that I found, I guess, and then yeah, move on to book
Well, that's
two
Luke.
Yeah,
straight
Luke.
away.
That's
Yeah.
that's
That
Luke.
is
Yes.
Oh yeah,
Go
sorry, yeah,
ahead.
plot wise, yeah, for sure.
yes, because like the first Jedi, he discovers is Gantoris, and again, I think with Gantoris, it's very much like a give and take for me because I think this setup with him first, like obviously he's very intentionally set up to be like this first tragic failure of Luke, but at the same time, his actual character and the actual dynamic of their initial interactions with Luke going to his people and how they view his Jedi abilities and how it's set up as Gantoris's own powers kind of leading him to be like the leader of these people, and that initial distrust again structurally kind of like the Han and Kip and Kessel stuff. I actually kind of like the setup that's done here, and I think Gantoris as a character, he is kind of one note, especially with him kind of being sidelined by Kip later on. But at the same time, I did kind of like the characterization that they did do with him, even if it was fairly basic.
I like the
Um,
concept. I don't.
yeah,
I didn't
That's
get
what I was
that
gonna say.
much out of the. I wouldn't say it was poor execution in this case, but a lot of it is just from how ho hum like la di da Luke is about everything. I'm just
Yeah.
kind of like whatever, Like I mean, if Luke was more interesting, I like this as a setup for him to be confronted with and like a perspective. It's a good idea. It's just
Yeah.
not assembled,
yeah,
But
And Luke is
yeah.
both responsible for what happens both in his inaction and his action as well. So it's like he fails on both sides of the coin when it comes to Gantoris. And it's also not addressed. It happens and they move on. And it's like, what? I mean,
Yeah.
this should have been like the fulcrum of your entire first third of the trilogy. I mean, if not later than that. This should have been like the
I mean, in
pre.
some ways it is because like he's kind of XR's first
Yeah, no, for sure. In
victim in that
plot
tragedy.
terms, in terms of how much time
Yeah,
he spent with Gantoris, and then he's the first victim of Exar Kun, of course. But in terms of like story balance, it's a complete irrelevancy. I mean, it may as well not even happened for how much it has anything to do with Kip. It's and his fall and Luke's reception to him, etc. It's just the whole academy doesn't even address it. It's like, oh yeah, that
yeah.
happened. Moving on.
Yeah, this is what I mean. Like,
It's like,
Again,
I
that's
like
another
this.
area. That's another area in which Jedi does a lot of heavy lifting with that. But at the same time, I do kind of like this framing of a force wielder in this sort of specific societal frame up, and not only demonstrating how far that can get you, but also Gantoris's own how his ideals kind of impact his sort of interactions with Luke and the history there. At the same time, like the test of like Luke walking on lava is obviously just kind of meant to be this fun little effect sort of thing to prove to Gantoris, what the Force can do. But at the same time, I don't know. I guess what I do kind of like about Gantoris is in this book specifically is the frame up of like his yes, he's gruff. Yes, he values strength, but at the same time, his commitment to a broader duty and his sort of extreme loyalty to his people. I don't know. It's stuff you've seen before, but I think it was well done in and of itself. You do kind of get the feeling like, oh, maybe if XR had never come around, he would have developed into a fairly competent Jedi, which is kind of a shame. So again,
I
credit where it's
yeah,
due.
I agree with that. I kind of he suffered from the fact that the middle book was the only one I had read before, so I knew that
Mm,
that wasn't really going to come to anything. But I think that the setup is competently done in the
mm,
over the course of the first book. It doesn't. I don't want to say it's nothing special because it's not his fault. The Gantoris character or like his sort of setting, his milieu, his where he's from, and everything. That's all the interesting stuff. It's the
mhm,
fact that I just don't think this guy, this author, knows how to write Luke or many of the characters really, but
yeah.
Luke in general. I think he was really without a paddle. He just didn't know what to do with him. I mean, he knew broadly, okay, he's going to teach Jedi, but I mean specifically,
yeah, it's
like
it's
I
taking
just don't think.
Return of the Jedi Luke, or even New Hope Luke, because it feels a lot more like that sometimes, and making him a Jedi Master. That transition, that what does he look
Yeah,
like in this space, is very much lacking, isn't it? I mean, just the fact that he's
yeah,
not teaching anybody, it's
yeah.
a problem.
Right.
I mean, he has a couple lessons as we'll get to, and we'll talk about those. But I mean, it's just
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is
yeah.
very much. I
Regurgitating
mean, some,
those three things that Yoda told me, and the kids, and the students being like, "Well, I mean, why are they following him? Like, after about 10 minutes, they're
Well,
basically his
we'll get
equal.
to
But yeah,
that.
we'll get
We'll
that. Yeah.
get to that because that's in book
Well,
2.
like,
Yeah.
I mean,
But
to be fair, like, he does kind of earn with Gantoris, he does kind of earn
No, for sure. I just
that.
mean later on. Sorry, with the actual academy setting. But yeah, Matt's right. Later on, with Gantoris in itself, I did think it does as a concept. It's very kind of mythological. It's got that kind of the stranger comes and performs acts of power and kind of and leads the person away to a greater, if not brighter, future. You know, it's leaning into all of those kind of tropes. So I thought it was effective there. But yeah, just like Matt says, it just doesn't go anywhere really because Gantoris
Yeah.
is
if he was the
often
guy,
unceremoniously.
if this was all his notion, and I'm happy to credit him with the idea, I think he's a decent idea guy, much like George Lucas. It needs different dialogue, it needs different pacing. I don't know if I meant to mention that a long time ago. The pacing is all over the place with these, and it's come up. We've already talked about it in different ways, and you guys have mentioned it as well. But it is just the pacing is so strange, and this all the Jedi stuff I think is the stuff that obviously suffers most, and that was arguably kind of you kind of were having to give the film some grace with that anyway, because relatively speaking, it comes off like he's had about 5 minutes of training next to what he
Yeah.
should have had, but
Yeah.
it works on the context of what you're doing.
Exactly,
And
yeah.
it kind of is the point that it is so threadbare and so kind of the fact that he chooses himself to end it when he does because he wants to go save his friends is another. It's kind of baked into the story
They make
in
a bit
such
of
a way that
business of it. Yeah.
you can accept
Yeah.
it. I wouldn't say that you want to hand wave it, and it's not as bad as not so bad as to be hand waveable anyway. But it is a potential criticism or critique that you could level against the films themselves, and it doesn't really tee up what the actual traditional true Jedi experience is meant to be, especially because it's in a prequel era where it could have been
Mhm.
kind of anything. So
Yeah.
this is doing what it can with what it can in that regard, but it could be doing so much more with just a little bit more. I would say just a little bit more imagination and a lot better sense of how to pace a story and what drives a story forward. Like, why do the characters make the choices that they make? This
Mhm.
guy, he's making authorial. That's the blob races. There is no reason for that other than I need the character to do
Mhm.
something. And while things are not necessarily as bad as the blob races all throughout, that's here like in spades. It's just I need a scene where this happens. I need a scene where that happens. I need to
Right.
delay the characters. I need to hamper the characters. I need them to be in danger, but not too much danger. Which
Right.
can we talk about Dala now and kind of just end
Well, can
on
we
Well,
her?
we've got
do
Stream
we
to talk
wanna before
about.
we do that, can we move into Streen? Yeah,
Definitely.
the
You go
Luke's
first, Evan.
next student to be, recruited with Gantoris. Again, Streen is one of those characters where it generally feels like, Anderson liked this character and really goes out of his way to, like, give him again, it's like we keep saying, the voice isn't strong, but he has more voice than a lot of other characters in this book, and I also just kind of like well, it's twofold. On the one hand, I like how he's representative of both how one's personal history and character can impact their development in their relationship to the Force, and at the same time also being representative of how really dangerous these sort of powers can be to the individual without proper guidance. Like having because like imagine you're hearing his whole thing is he's very attuned to the thoughts and emotions of those around him, so much so that it drives him to self isolate. On Bespin, he's a Tabana, prospector, and he's older, by the way. It's we should worth pointing that out too. He's like Streen is like uh, relative.
In his 60s,
Would you
right?
say
That
old?
kind of vibe?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
not like old, but he's like what you would consider like an older man. So this has been something he's been dealing with for a very very long time, and that's interesting because it flat out states like he doesn't enjoy doing this. He just has to because he has to just escape all of the voices in his head because naturally that would drive anybody crazy. So I appreciate that. And then on a lighter note, his sort of connection to the environment, the weather, how that kind of impacts his ability to touch the force. Even at this point in the story, he describes the energies around him as kind of like the winds of the Bespin mines and all sorry the Bespin clouds and all that. And I like obviously this will come up later in the series when he really starts tapping into his abilities, but I do like the juxtaposition between Streen and Gantoris as characters and their relationship to the Force. I think again structurally is really well handled, and I like the fact that this is the immediate follow up to Luke discovering Gantoris because it illustrates two very different sides of the same coin with this particular Jedi journey. And it's a good way of setting up the fact that all of these students are going to be bringing their own unique perspectives to this academy. So again, structurally, it's fine. And again, Streen himself, like, what do we have to say about that? Because I've been rambling
I
at this
forgot
point.
about him. Like
No,
he to me,
Okay, fair
I
enough.
have nothing to say about him. Like I think he's misused, but like all the characters are. So I mean I don't quarrel with anything you said about what makes him work as a concept, but he doesn't. It might just be I have a poor memory for this era or this batch of characters, and I've certainly not read like all of like everything there is to read here. But with him, I had nothing to say. In full disclosure, this like I skipped him by accident, and you guys drew my attention back to it.
mm.
So I
I
mean,
I was I don't know about expecting it, but I thought you might have more favourable things to say about him, if nothing else, for the presentation of the initial introduction, because I really enjoyed his intro to the story. I thought that the idea, all things you flagged, Evan, the kind of representation of what he means for the story as the type of Jedi he will go on to be, the relationship with the Force, contrast with that against Gantoris, nature of the self-isolation but the desperation through his being lonely despite that. It was a forced isolation. He didn't want to do this, and he's been struggling with it.
Mhm.
The age difference, but all of that wrapped around the fact that it's quite an aesthetically pleasing intro visually. I mean, when
I
they're
found it.
leaving, and he
Mhm.
and he feels like, I'm kind of I'm sort of sad to leave this place. I feel like I've become so acclimatized to this environment that I'm
Mhm.
sort of I'm not sure about this. And then you
There's a
have
part of me
the
that's afraid to.
yeah,
Yeah.
afraid to leave, exactly. And the flock of birds, not birds, I mean, whatever the creatures are, I forget them off the top of my head. But the flock to kind of rise up into the sky in like a salute of goodbye to him, and it eases him a bit. I thought it was a
I
really beautiful
really enjoyed
moment.
that too. That was one of the most cinematic scenes in this entire book, in a book
Mm,
All,
that's really absent. So I
all I
really
could
liked
all I can say is clearly forgot about him as it's a book one
it.
thing. There's three books. It took a while for us
yeah,
all to
no,
get
for
through them.
sure.
This,
Yeah.
this did not.
And the problem
It did
is,
not.
it ends there. Like, he becomes completely irrelevant until he goes a little
This
bit
is what I'm
raving mad
saying. He's
later on. Yeah,
misused. Like that. Like
exactly.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
So,
am. If I can agree with everything you're saying, if you remind me of it, that in the context of this book, well done.
Mhm.
In the context of this, whatever. You know what I
mm,
mean? It's just
exactly.
like I just
Yeah.
don't. Again, I would much rather all of these characters just had different, just more to do, and had been
Mhm.
Amounted to
brought
something.
into the story in different
Yeah, yeah.
ways. Yeah, the
And
whole story is just a disappointment to me. Like, yeah, for
Mm.
sure.
yeah. And to that point too, though, I will say another character beat I like in this scene too from Gantoris is actually the fact of him trying to, as Luke is talking to Streen, and Streen is being a bit resistant. Even Gantoris is like, no, like, Master Skywalker has shown me the way. You have this potential too. Together we are strong. Again, it's a very minor thing, but I do like the fact that that illustrates, one, for Gantoris's character, his initial loyalty to the Order, and the fact that he is willing to vouch for Luke's, teachings, even though he's not much more new to it than Streen is. I don't know. It's a minor thing, but that does kind of speak to his character a little bit. Again, very basic, very minor, but consistent with what we've seen so far. And it does kind of, again, like, it also just kind of speaks to like the tragedy of him getting cut off at the knee so early later in the series, because you do again kind of get the feeling, maybe with a bit more proper guidance, this guy really could have gone on to be a truly great Jedi. So again, praise where it's due. Very minor point, but that is another interaction that I do kind of appreciate. And also kind of, again, we talked about the age difference. It's like, he is the youngest out of these three, but at the same time, he is still vouching for what Luke is saying to Streen. So you could kind
Mm.
of play with that perspective as well. I mean, Gantoris is not like young. I mean, he's a little bit older than Kip, but still fairly young, all things considered.
It's the question of age measured by time versus age measured by experience. He's
Thank you.
lived a
That's what I
lot.
was
He's
looking
lived a
for.
lot longer than Streen in terms of that. He's had to face a lot more adversity, a lot more consistent problems in his life, and just a rougher upbringing. But that isn't to say, however, that Streen hasn't suffered and struggled. He's had this forced isolation put upon him by the fact that he can't exist around large numbers of people for his own sanity, and it's the
Can I ask you a
ideas of the
question?
concepts of these characters and the reason they're being introduced as they are and the problems they're raising within the world and the story are all solid. It's just nothing gets done with them. This should have been another
Okay, I was
conversation.
gonna say, am I forgetting? Like, does Streen have some kind of major payoff that I'm just
No,
blanking on?
none at all. He
I am
drops
so
off after this.
sorry.
No,
I have nothing to say about this character. Everything
I'd
you
be
guys are
interested to
saying
see you go back and
is like,
reread
yeah.
his specifically just his intro chapter, because I think I did think it was quite strong, but I completely agree. I understand why you'd forget about it, because he's just
Yeah,
not
okay.
It's just
nothing is
in
done with
this
anything
book.
about it.
It's just a blip. Like Screen
Yeah,
in particular is just a blip in this book. So,
Okay,
and
yeah.
it doesn't help that he's introduced relatively late in the book too. So like by then you've already had to slog
yeah.
through so much.
I actively feel bad for like forgetting him the way that you guys are talking about him, because I'm just like, why do I remember all this shit? Because like this sounds much better. Like, you know what I mean?
But
So
post
anyway,
this book, he becomes like a tangled haired. I mean, first of all, he's just following other people in the background, not saying anything. But when he then does start
yeah, that's
saying
my
something,
memory of
he's
him.
a
He's
tangled
just kind of
haired, like
there.
voices, the weirdness,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
he has the one scene where he's actually getting involved again properly, which is kind of nice. But that's it. He has like 3
yeah,
big moments in the trilogy,
yeah.
and they're not connected, and they don't have any particular trajectory tying them
Mhm.
together. It's a really strong.
Justice for Streen. Streen should have had a book. You know,
But
like
yeah,
there should have been a
exactly. He's a
Streen
good,
book.
I
solid
Yeah.
I'd be
character choice.
fine with that. Honestly, he's a character with a lot of potential.
Yeah, and not just what he's doing in the scene as well. Though I like his introductory scene quite a lot. I think it's really powerful, but just but in powerful broadly, and not just relative to this story. I think it was a really solid choice. But
I
even
remember
what he was
now that
brought
you
in to
mention it.
represent, it never went anywhere.
Yeah. Because this was like a month or two ago when I was going through that, and I remember thinking, oh, it's got like that Martian Manhunter episode where he's tired of everybody's thoughts, and
Yeah,
like it's a
Yes,
similar to
selfish.
that. Yeah.
I
I
was thinking
thought
of
of that
that.
when I reread this. Yeah.
Completely
Hmm.
blanked on him, just which is not his fault. Clearly, it's mine. But
Okay.
anyway,
But yeah, no, it was a tragedy that it was neglected. But
this is
someone
what
that
the series
isn't.
should be about. You see,
Yeah,
like so
exactly,
it's like I
exactly.
just don't get,
Jedi
like
and
I
coming
don't
to the
get this.
academy and having and Luke
Yeah,
solving these problems, because he thinks, okay, well, this needs to be
yes,
somewhere isolated, because these
yes,
Jedi have different problems manifesting in different ways. I need to isolate some of them. I need to give more exposure to others. We need to explore these powers. How am I going to do that? How am I going to do that safely? What pace am I going for? Because the Republic needs knights now. Do I cut
yeah.
some corners? If
Mhm.
so, how?
Well,
These are
okay,
things
but why
that you should
does it
talk
need
about
knights
it.
now though? But why does it
Oh
need
yeah,
knights now?
that's
Can
the other
we
thing.
talk
Yeah,
about
it
that?
doesn't establish that.
Yeah.
That's another problem we'll get to later in the
Okay.
trilogy. But yeah, that
Okay.
is an issue.
Right.
They talk about we need
Because that's
them.
an
Like,
issue I
you
have.
don't.
Big problem.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they need him because like this new threat is looming, which we can
Yes.
What
use that
threat
as a
though?
Okay.
But
transition.
what
Yeah.
threat?
Yeah,
Because we get
let's get into
Dala.
Dala and her whole thing.
This is a character who I've known what she's about and her whole vibe just through osmosis. I had friends when I was younger who were more into this era than I ever was. I was very much focused on the Old Republic up through about the prequels and a toe into this area because of like the Thrawn trilogy and everything like that. So I always knew that she had been sort of like Tarkin's protege. I would have preferred that was all she was rather than his lover,
Yeah,
as we're told constantly. And it's not
just a
just
bit.
because of that's creepy and
Yeah.
weird, but it's also I just think it speaks more to like her merit and like the idea of the character as an actual threat. If he just thought she was that competent and that badass and that
And she didn't have a
worthy of rising
personal
through the
shrine
ranks,
to him. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a little much.
and I always knew that was a hallmark of her character because that this has been something that people have been saying about her since the books were published, was just like and again, this at this point, there are elements of this character that I don't like that aren't her fault. Some of it is the timing of it, but I think at this point, the idea of like a resurgent empire is well stale. I mean, that's that you have the heir to the empire, which is a wonderful phrase and title and concept for the character of like Thrawn, right?
Hmm.
And then you have all the business there. You have the Juris Sabayoth bringing in the kind of Jedi element of it, and then you have Dark Empire, where the Emperor himself comes back, and that it's ridiculous and shouldn't happen. And then you also have just other stories with like the Imperial Remnant and stuff like that going on. This now is like, can we do something other than a stand-in for the Death Star? It's like kind
Hmm.
of. We got the Sun Crusher, but
Oh, the
that's
Sun
not
But I
all.
Crusher.
also got the
Let's
Death Star.
Because we've also got the Death Star, so we'll get to that
a
later.
prototype Death Star, no less.
We'll get to that in book 3.
Oy.
But I mean,
Yeah.
but uh, this concept would have been fine. It would have been mostly fine if not for Thrawn. I think Thrawn is. This is like a
Mhm,
much more. This is like a pale imitation of what Thrawn already represented, and
mhm.
like conceptually,
Yeah.
secret admiral. Supposedly this sort of genius with strategy, and she rose through the sexist race of the empire, which is also silly. I mean, you do notice it. when you're watching the films, but you kind of just take it as like what was made in the 70s, and it didn't have like the vision of being part of a franchise and everything else with like
Mm.
the Moffs, of course, you know,
Right.
like I mean, whatever. It very much is like, well, yeah, if women can be Jedi and politicians and leaders and everything else and soldiers and pilots, and why on earth not, you know, serve in like the upper echelon of like the Imperial because they're women? It's like that seems really silly and stupid and
Mhm.
short-sighted, but
Yeah.
okay. So but even if I take all of that as read, okay, she must be seriously damn good then because she rose through all that. And and we'll
Nope.
get into the reason, we'll get into that disappointment, but I have to say, unlike Thrawn, the and again, this is not Dala's fault. This is a conceptual fault for me. I'm not the world builder guy here. Like I would, that Callan, that's more your crown. But there are things that there are times where I'm just like, and the idea that she is specifically completely unaware of everything that's happened up to this point. You know, basically,
Mm.
and I find that more than a little far fetched. I mean, how long has Tarkin been dead at this point? It's been a
Is it
long
12,
time.
14 years you mentions, I
And
think?
there's been, they mention how there's but these people have not been like relieved of duty to go
Yeah,
back home,
exactly.
or
Yeah, the
I
whole
mean
thing. I mean,
it's just
you can sell within the confines of a story that needs to allow this. You can sell the fact that she's been cut off this far. What you can't then do is spend the entire trilogy raising the question of, well, why was she cut off for this long? Because it's very clear that they can just waltz out with you know, at a moment's notice with no risk.
Mhm.
Send one probe out, check with with an information source, come back in. I mean, it's clearly not challenging. So
Yeah,
it
exactly. It's
falls
like
flat
with
on its
most
face
things in this.
post this first book, as with most
Yeah,
things.
it's like most things in this series. Interesting conception, but just very, very poor execution. And like you were speaking to Matt, like the thing with her history with Tarkin, again, conceptually, I think has a lot of potential. Tarkin's always, I think we kind of mentioned this in the past. Like Tarkin's kind of one of those characters that I think we all don't necessarily dislike, but we don't also just like spend all of our mental energy, pondering about
I
so
never
He's
really
to speak.
gave
entirely
him much
carried by the
thought.
Um,
performance of Peter Cushing. He's not a character outside of
yeah,
that.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
he's representative of the Empire in the original trilogy, and he's arguably. I mean, I would say he's the most interesting of the pure Imperials that we get in the OG trilogy. I would argue, but again,
Sure.
so much of that is just backed on, like you were saying, Cal, and Peter Cushing's performance, which is fantastic. And I'm of course not above. I'm not. Excuse me. I'm not opposed to adding to this character's history post, mortem, if it's
Mm.
done in a way that like again, like we'll get into the Sun Crusher stuff in a little bit. The idea of Thrawn commissioning, a super weapons sorry, Thrawn, Tarkin commissioning a super weapons division and being like, okay, you've built the Death Star, so now do it again, but better. It's like, yeah, I can actually buy that being a thing based on like what little we get from the character in A New Hope. But at the same time, what really kills it, like the relation with Dal, if it was just like a mentor student thing, like you were kind of speaking to, Matt, and it was just like so impressed with her that he saw something in her that no one else saw.
Yeah.
And again, that also speaks to Tarkin's own character and his own perception and him willing. If he was like, built up as like, oh, he saw in her a skill that nobody else did because XYZ. That's interesting because that adds twofold layers. It adds layers to him and it adds layers to her. But
Exactly.
again, when
Elevates
you get
both.
into the obsession, when you get into the romance, the sort of, in just a
Yeah.
weird way, she kind of like,
She hero worships
again,
him.
her
She
being
completely
in awe of
idolizes
him
him.
as like her teacher is fine, but it gets into like like how do I even say this? Like fangirly
Yeah,
territory.
Wait, like Callan,
100%.
Callan just said,
Yeah,
yeah,
hero
Callan
worships
just
and
said she
idolization. Like she
yeah,
has a pretty
Yeah,
much has a digital shrine to Tarkin. Oh, I'm having a bad
yeah,
day. I'll go back to my Tarkin files and I'll read, listen to everything, and it'll make everything
yeah.
better because
I
he's such a
think that
genius. And oh my
diminishes
god,
Dala as a character,
one
like, a
hundred
lot.
percent,
Like,
one hundred percent.
it doesn't give her own agency. Her being Thrawn, why do I keep saying Thrawn? Her being Tarkin's protege is not
Because
the
she's
issue.
Thrawn.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
That's the
okay.
reason why. Like she's the hidden threat, like off in this corner of nowhere. Like here, I'm back. And I agree. I mean, this was always the thing I knew about her from the jump. Was like my friend had told me, yeah, she's like this sort of Tarkin worshiper. He trained her, but it's deeper than that. It's like this full blown obsession and blah blah blah. And I obviously I knew more than just that because when you look at all the chronology books, her deeds and the
Mm,
impact she has impact because she fails all the time as well. Like
yeah.
she
That's a big
succeeds
part of it
never.
too. She doesn't feel like
Um,
a
no,
credible threat.
Certainly not after
she's
this trilogy.
no. it really is bizarre, and the idea that you don't have this strong, charismatic, well-honed antagonist that functions as like this kind of galvanizing agent for the rest of the characters. I mean, honestly, like I said, I'm sick of the resurgent empire at this point. I just
Mm,
am. But it could still be done better than this. However, if I was to give a list of like maybe my requests or like a wish list of what I would have wanted instead is I'm sick of super weapons. I'm sick of all that. I get that that's like a hallmark of this series, especially this is like a pre-prequel era. You only know so
Mm.
much things about like the George Lucas vision. You
mhm,
kind of your concept of what Star Wars is. Yeah, we're
yeah,
trying to destroy some planets or whatever. I mean, they themselves bring the Death Star back in Jedi, so I kind of get that. I don't blame him for that lack of vision, right? But it is a lack of vision. Okay,
yeah. I mean, we
I
didn't
don't
get any
blame him
planet
for that.
destroyers in the prequel, so there's that.
And Thrawn
Yeah,
trilogy as well,
sure.
but like Matt said before, the Thrawn trilogy
But
has also then done the absence of the destroyers, so it's like the
the
space is narrowed for them in their minds.
this trilogy specifically gave me a much higher opinion of the Thrawn trilogy. It was I always knew I already had a pretty high opinion of that. It's just it was relative
Mhm,
because
Mm.
but for so many years, if what you had was the Thrawn trilogy and stuff like this and more of this and more of that and more of this,
mhm,
the Thrawn trilogy was far and away superior to this. But
yeah,
my point being though, I if I could ask for what I wanted from this, like, if you wanted to keep the bones of the character, even down to the fact that she had been a part, like a former Imperial, I would have made her just that, a former Imperial, and I would have liked for her to have galvanized, sort of like a hitherto unknown region of space into a functional government, so that you
Mm.
have, if it had really been like a question of opposing governments with just different cultural sensibilities, and one having like that sort of more military culture and sort of the questionable morality, guide as its guiding principles, but it's a functioning government, and one that can be a mainstay already as far as they're concerned because she could have erected it. I would have preferred that she's done it. That she would have been more aware of what had happened with the empire kind of going,
mhm,
tits up, earlier than. I mean, obviously she had no idea. So I would have liked foreknowledge for her because I just think that that's more believable. And
Mm.
then for her to have constructed something rather than trying to wage a war of conquest on the rest of the New Republic, sort of doing something else. But maybe if she really had a sensibility of like, okay, well, if I know that you're now trying to rebuild the Jedi, and I know that one way or another they're going to be influential, whether they turn to the dark side or not. Our cultures are just going to run into conflict, like she should know, or anyone would know from a study of the history, that there's
Mm.
only so much that treaties and territorial boundaries are going to, insulate you from a conflict driven by the Force. So it's kind of like in that case, the Republic rekindling the light of the Jedi in itself is just going to be it's another side of the question we talked about, which would have been a
Exactly,
more
it's raising the
like interesting
questions.
idea of the senators or,
Mm.
or the leaders, the governors of the New Republic, kind of like, okay, make this manifest then, like,
yeah,
if we're questioning it ourselves as members of this new republic, certainly another culture and one that's familiar with the history here is going to have something to say about a reforged Jedi Order. I mean, it would give her a reason to also start making moves now, where
Yeah,
before she was
exactly. The
content to
timing
yeah,
is
just
it,
yeah,
and you.
yeah, and to add to that, because like in something like that also would have added a lot more credence to the conflict that Leia has to deal with between some of the Imperial loyalists within the New Republic, which ends up,
yeah.
again, we'll talk about this more in, champions of the Force and all that, because that's when that really comes to a head. But like, it would have given more agency to this faction that still benefited from the Empire, and would actually give Leia, like I was more weight to her conflict, and that sort of it would hammer in the idea that like, no, like this is why we need to keep the New Republic together. This is the agency that Leia has to embody. This is why Mon Mothma has to do what she does, and this is why it's really bad for characters like, yeah, I know,
We'll get
bad
to
for
Mon
Forgot
characters
Mothma.
like
about that. Oh my
We'll
god.
get
bad
to
for
Yeah,
Mon
characters
okay, go
Mothma.
bad for
ahead,
characters
sorry,
like
sorry,
Ak
go ahead,
no,
go
it's
ahead,
okay, it's
yes,
okay. I'm
yeah,
with you, I'm with you.
yeah.
And this is also why it would be bad for characters like Akbar to jump ship, when he did, and would give Leia more reason to go back and get him, because no, we need to deal with this because we're dealing with this on multiple fronts.
I
but they
love
don't
that
do that.
idea
And
for for the reason of like the idea of Leia being thrust into the driver's seat, being charged with all of that behind it would be so strong. I love that.
mm,
I'm sorry that that's not what we got actually,
yeah,
but like not in that way.
and
But
here's the
anyway,
way you introduce Dala's appearance and this new threat and this new problem in a dynamic way that is different from what's come before. Is you have her arrival being the rescuing of Han and
that would be really
and
cool.
Chewbacca from the
Yeah,
mines.
Yeah.
She
yeah.
jumps in. This is a problem. We're solving it. Oh, and we're dominating the space as well because that's what empires do. But this is us now. We're freeing the slaves. We're freeing you. Go back to your people. They've arrived in Star Destroyers. They're in imperial, garb or style at least adjacent, and they're now having to deal with the question of what is this? What is this new thing that's happening? Maybe tie Mara to it and the smugglers from there and that side of things, and they've got their own.
Tie Amara to something, please.
Exactly.
Yeah, give her some
Bring her in
agency
at
at the
least. Like
very least.
she didn't
Yeah.
even appear until it's nuts. Anyway,
No,
but
it's
just
nuts.
but then have them
yeah.
going on. Okay, so the question of what we're going to do about this. This is a new faction. This is new. This is something we haven't got to how to deal with. They're not the evil empire, and also maybe once things are pushed a bit further down the line later in the series, they're attacking the empire because they're taking space from them, and we don't believe in this slave planet they've got running. This academy is brutal, and they're selling the PR of we're trying to get rid of some of these things, something that we consider our past, and that's painting this idea of this political spectrum and for the galaxy and this idea for the people of, well, they're clearly not the same as the empire. We shouldn't be opposed to this. It's just a different republic. This is a different kind of a faction that we can get along with, we can talk with. And you've got then the struggles of Mon Mothma and Leia and the council seeing beneath that potentially. They send
That'd be
Jedi
really
into
cool.
beneath the
Exactly.
surface.
That would have been.
What do we
But
do
instead,
about
what we
this?
get is this like disjointed mess of like various narratives with very little crossover. And again, like conceptually, some of what Dala does is not bad on paper. It's just that like we've seen it with Thrawn, we've seen it with arguably with Tarkin himself,
Yeah.
and it just leaves her so little room to stand out as her own character, even though there are little bits here and there that try to give her her own unique voice, but sadly, we're just not with her enough in that specific space to really get a feel for this character, which, again, I'd like to say that it gets better later on, but it sadly
But
does
we
not.
know better.
It really
We
Yeah.
know
doesn't.
better.
It's beat for beat. Every single book, she fails the exact same way and reacts the exact same
Yeah.
way. She's just an incompetent leader, and you could tell a story there, but it's not what she's framed as, and it's not what the story's trying to frame
No.
her as, so it doesn't work. And just the whole everything about the world building around her little military force and how she uses it and how it feels about her and how it manifests and what she's going for and why and all, it just completely falls flat on its face.
What
You
about
cannot
her Admiral
perceive her
Kane
as
maneuver
competent.
with a bunch
Oh.
of public executions to galvanize her leadership? What about that?
I mean, everything about this woman is just a disaster. I mean, Honor Harrington, she is not, but Jesus Christ. Anyway, yeah, the whole, we'll get there for the book 2 and 3 because it's worse there, but the book 1 is bad enough on that front.
Yeah. Do we also want to maybe wrap this up by talking about the enigma that is the Sun Crusher? Because the Sun Crusher is one of those things a lot of people like. Okay, I said this in the Dark Empire review. I don't hate it as much as I hate the Galaxy Gun, but there's a reason the Sun Crusher is fairly infamous as like one of the worst super weapons in the franchise. What do we have to say about that?
It's just a stupid. I mean, put aside, it's like the 5th super weapon. It's a stupid concept. You're raising a problem for yourself that you did not need to raise narratively. It's like, okay, well, there's this single ship that can fly anywhere and annihilate anything at a whim, or it's indestructible, untraceable, pretty much, because it's only one tiny little ship. Anyone can fly it. It doesn't take much time. Its one restriction is it's taken away from its supplier, so it only has like 6 torpedoes. Everything else, I mean, that's just setting breaking. There's no reason this couldn't be replicated. There's no reason they couldn't just make another one for many different reasons.
This feels
also a really silly name.
Yeah, of course.
Like,
Everything
you know what I
about
mean?
this is
Like,
just dumb.
yeah.
It's a dumb idea
Yeah.
that should not have been come up with, basically. And quantum armor, and when every time they mention it, it's like, oh, Jesus
It feels
Christ.
like a comic book, but in the worst ways, ironically. We were talking about how this series probably would have been better as a comic book story, but this feels like the worst elements of like the tropey, old
It
school
belongs
super,
in Dark
like,
Empire, this idea. And that's not a compliment, as we know.
And again, the only reason I hold it in higher esteem than the Galaxy Gun, well, for one thing, the design's better, and it's like at least they try and make it plot relevant in some way. I mean, the Galaxy Gun is literally just a big gun in space that does nothing. So at least at the bare minimum, I will give it that. But aside from that, it's pretty awful.
I had flashes of all those things and Starkiller Base. I'm sorry to say, but it's just like, again, it's just like, could we do something else? Could we like this is why the prequel era EU was so much better to me. Is like we weren't constantly running into the same kind of threat all the time, and most of it was about like the character the character drama. You know what I mean? The internal conflict about like, or it was a satisfying mystery kind of,
Yeah.
plot. Here and there, every
Mm,
now and then.
exactly. It was
This
trying
it's
something
just
new.
that. This very
Yeah.
much I understand why for many years people thought the EU was bad, or
Mm,
knew it to be bad in some cases. This isn't necessarily this isn't the worst stuff, but it is just like how much more of this do you need? You know what I
mm,
mean? It really is just like I mean I've read worse books than this. I mean to say, but
Mhm.
I also didn't get much out of it. I Since we're wrapping up on this particular book, I do want to underscore that for me this is as good as this series gets. I'm sorry to say. That's mostly about like how the story is structured for me. Like,
mm,
it's this particular book. The writing quality all throughout the trilogy is pretty much consistent. It's just that this one I can at least see where things could have gone right. And that wasn't entirely undermined by the end of it. Admiral
Mhm.
Dalla and the Sun Crusher and everything else, you know, notwithstanding. That's the weakest stuff, on
mm.
page. Everything else that we're talking about is more stuff in principle, or just stuff we would have liked better, or stuff, I mean, Lando
Yeah.
is a high crime, but in general, like you said, Callan, it's not exactly like that ruins the whole universe or anything. It's just
Mm.
mind-numbingly
Mhm.
stupid and
Painful,
terrible.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like again, and this will be a consistent, complaint from me throughout. Like, in a lot of interesting ideas, some interesting settings, interesting setup for stuff that will later be, done much better in future works. Characterization, bits of interesting character here and there, but overall, just kind of a weird disjointed, messy sort of thing that genuinely exceeds in some parts, but for the most part is just kind of meh in others.
Mm, agreed. I mean, everything we talked about at the start basically carries through here. It's. I think agree with Matt. It's the best of the three in terms of structure, and it's committing the least crimes overall in terms of the arts of the craft and the characters that it's talking about and it's introducing and discussing, etc. But yeah, it's apart from that, it's just it was the introduction of the weirdness of this. I hadn't read this trilogy before, and I was like, this is a weird trilogy of stuff that's going on here, and that will carry on for the rest of the books, and we'll have more to talk about. There are things we didn't discuss in this first one. They are here in this first book, but they're more relevant in book 2 and 3, like Queezuks and the toddlers and all of that stuff. There's stuff to
Yeah, that's
reference,
oh,
but we'll talk about that in the
you should
next
be
in the
ready
next
for
book
that.
because
Yeah.
yeah, we only have so much time for each. But yeah, let us know in the comments what you think of this trilogy and this book in particular. We hope you've enjoyed the slightly hit and miss feel of this because yeah, we have varying opinions in various positions. So I hope you've
It's
enjoyed.
it's a Jedi search, and searches can have hits and misses. So
Yes, yeah. This has been our Fanalysis on Jedi Search. I'm Callan, and I still don't have an outro.
This is Matt. Thanks for watching. I made my case as best I can, and I stand by it. Thank you.
Evan Nova 95. We hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you guys later.
Goodbye.